the meeting of the Planning Commission for May 30th, 2018 to order. Can we have a roll call, please? Or actually, should we be calling this as a growth management?
No.
We'll call planning and then adjourn to. Okay, thank you.
Chairperson Sattler.
Present.
Vice Chair Borders.
Here.
Commissioner Eswine.
Here.
Commissioner Monroy.
Here.
Commissioner Preston.
Here.
Commissioner Stoll.
Here.
Commissioner Tingle.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Public comment. The public is invited at this time to comment on and discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of the Planning Commission, including any matters that are not specifically included in the agenda as an action item. Is there any public comment at this time? Come forward, please, and state your name.
My name is Suzanne Fox. I think some of you have seen me before. I was under the impression that the Vintage project would be discussed today, but it's not so. I just want to give you some more concerns that we have in the neighborhood. My concern is that the new development, and this is pretty much a done deal, we're aware of that, is riding on the coattails of the previous developer. In other words, he doesn't have to go through everything that Vince Scott went through. He has inherited all the variances and changes in the master plan, zoning variances, and I would very much like for those items, which are still contentious to us, to be re-examined so that we can be sure, and we can all be sure, that he is going to abide by all the regulations. And if possible, some of those can be changed. And I think that's it, and it wasn't even 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none. Possible action approval of the minutes of March 28th, 2018, the April 25th meeting, Planning Commission meetings. Any comments on the March or the April or changes?
Mr. Chairman, I do want to note something for the record with respect to the March 28th meeting minutes. You know, everyone knows that we have a statutory deadline and time frame in which to adopt those minutes, except for when there's good cause showing. I do want to note for the record that at the last meeting, or I'm sorry, 2 meetings ago, we were not able to approve that because there were some clarification issues, and that's why, for good cause showing, we had to extend it to today's date.
Great. All right, bring it back to the commission for a motion.
Thank you for clarifying the March 28th and making that correction. So I would move for approval of the March 28th and also the April 25th minutes.
We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We will recess as the Planning Commission and call to order a roll call and determination of a quorum. Do we need to do that again to become the Growth Management Commission?
Chair Sattler.
Present.
Vice Chair Borders.
Here.
Commissioner Eswine.
Here.
Commissioner Monroy.
Here.
Commissioner Preston.
Here.
Commissioner Stoll.
Here.
Commissioner Tingle.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Thank you. Again, for public comment, the public is invited at this time to comment on and discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of growth management. Sorry. Start again. The public is invited at this time to comment or to discuss any topic that is relevant to and within the authority of the Growth Management Commission, including any matter that is not specifically included on the agenda. Any public comment for growth management? Come forward and state your name, please.
So we're going to, so under this comment, if they can't reply at this time. This is general public comment. They have we have one item under Growth Management Commission. We're going to take that. We're going to take public comment during that item. You can take comment now, but they can't respond because the item's not open.
That's fine. My name is Maxine Neitz, and I've sat where you all are sitting. It's nice to see so many women on the commission. What I would like to say is, as you look at your growth management ordinance and your number of permits that you're planning on pursuing for this coming year, to remember not to Californicate or Reno-fornicate Carson City. We are a beautiful, wonderful, smaller city, and people are happy here, people of all ages, and we'd like to keep it that way. We don't want a plethora of apartment buildings rising up to 5 and 10 stories. That is not Carson City, that's Reno, that's California. And I urge you, as a citizen who's been active in the community and who's lived here for many years, to keep that in mind as you deliberate. Thank you.
Any other public comment at this time for growth management? Seeing none, for possible action, approval of the minutes from May 31, 2017.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion, we approve the minutes of, May 31st, 2017.
A motion from Commissioner Borders, a second.
Second.
Second from Commissioner Eswine. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We have a couple of abstentions that weren't probably here for the meeting. So, thank you. 3. GM-18-071 for possible action to recommend to the Board of Supervisors a resolution establishing the maximum number of residential building permit allocations under the Growth Management Ordinance for the years 2019 and 2020, and estimating the maximum number of residential building permits for the year 2021 and 22, establishing the number of building permits allocation within the development and general property owners category, and a maximum average daily water usage for commercial and industrial building permits as a threshold for growth management review. Lee?
Okay, good afternoon. Lee Plamwell, Community Development Director. I'll be giving a relatively brief presentation and overview on growth management. You have the report attached. I've also handed out some late material, part of which was emailed to you previously, but there is the last page on there that was not emailed, that's from the school district with some specific enrollment figures for all the actual, by individual schools. It was provided by the school district, so you have that in front of you. For anybody in the audience, there's copies of that late material in the back. So yeah, just to go over my presentation, I said it probably just about 10 minutes or so to give an overview, and then we have I'm sure you have a lot of questions. We have members here from various agencies to answer questions as well. So to start out again, as identified on the agenda, there's really these 3 things that the growth management is in charge of making recommendations on every year. Board of Supervisors makes the final decision. It's establishing the maximum number of residential permits. It's residential allocations. It's the number of residential units that may get building permits in the following year. I'll have some charts go over that a little bit. The recommendation is 659 for 2019. Establishing the number of building permit allocations split between the development and general property owner categories. So that's just a typical split that's been done every year, also per the ordinance. And then establishing the maximum average daily water uses above which, for industrial and commercial uses, above which Growth Management Commission review is required. Just again, a little bit of more background on the resources that are in the Carson City Growth Management Ordinance that are to be considered when making these recommendations and by the board in making the findings. It started in 1978 with water and sewer, it's expanded to this since then to these other types of services, which include a lot of public works services, water, sewer, traffic drainage, also have fire protection, sheriff, school district, and parks and recreation. So just to go through some of the charts, I know you have it in your staff report, but for the benefit of the public and anybody watching, and kind of just to go over some of the background. This is the full history of growth management since 1978, with the black line on top being the number of allocations that have been made available each year, the white line underneath it being the actual allocations that have been pulled in those various years. The chart at the bottom there just shows some averages and maximums over different time periods going back over the last 30 years, and those are included in your staff report as well. Just one extra thing to point out here is, as noted there, the last 30 years, the average number of units per year has been 229. Obviously, that includes about 10 years of recession numbers that are very low. So I just went back to the period starting 30 years ago and going through 2006, call those the pre-recession years, and the average was about 336 per year. You can see we still haven't got back even to the 229. We haven't got above 200 since 2006. And although in 2018 we still have some time left this year and some permits coming in, I would anticipate we'd get above 200 this year, maybe 300. And I guess I'll just take this opportunity to say that the building industry itself doesn't believe it can construct the maximum of about 659, just because of various factors, including labor and cost of construction. Just a little bit more on, this is the same chart, not going back as far, but this just shows the residential units by type of unit, with the yellow on the bottom of each bar being single-family detached product. The red and white checker is multifamily, and the areas in between there are other types of single-family attached products. So it's been a variation of single-family and multifamily over the years. Also included in your staff report and shown here are information regarding housing sales. I have this in here for information. I'll bring it to you. I'll give it to you as information. Not really drawing any conclusions about growth management regarding this. It's just a bit of information. This is through 2017. In 2017, sales were up. The median home price was getting close to $300,000, I would say, from what I've heard since then, and what's happening with the sales price of new homes now. It must certainly be over $300,000 in Carson City now, median home price. Again, as this relates to growth management, I'm not really coming to any conclusions with this. But as we talk about affordable housing for workforce housing, obviously the cost of housing is becoming unattainable for a lot of the workforce. And so I'll move on from that. I have them. So growth management. So obviously, if we're managing growth, there's some goal at the end. There's something we're managing at some point. We're managing it to. We have a limited amount of land in our valley. We're surrounded by open space, so there's a limited amount of land. So when we did our master plan in 2006, the theoretical population master plan build-out was said to be somewhere between 75,000 to 800,000 persons. 75,000 to 80,000 persons, yep. It's still between 875 and 800,000. And this shows our projection. So this shows the black line there are the demographers' latest populations projections. The demographer's a little bearish on where we stand now for population growth. That's pretty low because our city lines there, the red and the one above that, are kind of a range of population projections based on historic growth. The lower line represents about 0.7% growth, the upper line about 1.3% on average. That might vary in different years, but in the long run, that's where you would end up, the line would be going. And reaching that build-out population somewhere between 30 to 60 years from now, right, depending on how fast the population grows. So that's a population. So population is obviously, to get to a population, is based on the number of residential units you have, and it's population of residential units times however many persons per household. So how many units is that to get from where we are today to build out? So I've included a couple of charts for that. We currently have in Carson City about 23,600 dwelling units citywide. And it would take about 30, based on the average number of persons per household of about a little over 2.5, it takes about 32,000 units total to get to that population of almost 80,000 persons. So that leaves us with about 8,400 units between now and our theoretical build out to get to that population. So taking that 8,400 number, where do we stand then with those units, what's been approved and going forward? So moving that over to the chart on the right here, if we have 8,400 units to get to that build out, I've started an analysis I'm going to talk a little bit more about, that's going to get tied into a water analysis, a master plan analysis, but a little bit of a build out analysis, because in that right-hand chart there, the two bars on the right represent potential residential units based on our current master plan of all currently approved projects plus all potential development in all residentially designated areas. With the low estimate being those are pretty greenfield development, easy to develop. The higher estimate being if you tore down a house and built 3, if that was the maximum density there. So that would be with redevelopment, get to that maximum density. And so on kind of that initial analysis, there's still some capacity there to allow some additional units in other areas and still stay within that total 8,400 potential. Now, this is really a discussion. That's not a discussion about how many units to allow for next year. That's more of a master plan discussion, but I think it's good piece of information as part of this to see where we are overall. As I show there's the approved, so we have approved units that are at about 2,500 now, and more potential development in the future. Land available and designated for residential that gets us up towards that maximum population. And where are those approved units? So this is also in your packet, and I'll just put it up there. I'm not going to go through all of these. If you're looking at it on the TV, I know you can't read this because I've seen it on the screen up there. But you can kind of see where the lettering is. Those are the locations of the various approved projects around the city. Which represents, so approved is the multifamily who has some sort of approval plus subdivision maps for single-family lots. The breakdown right now for approved units is a little over 1,600 single-family units and almost 1,000 multifamily units with some sort of approval. Those single-family units represent mostly single-family detached, but also some single-family attached products that we've seen, townhome type of development, for a total of a little over 2,500 units. This is a snapshot in time. This fluctuates as building permits come in and new things come in to get approval. I would also note that approved units does not translate necessarily to imminently constructed units. What I mean by is it can take, for these specific units, it could take years, it could take decades for them all to get built out. I've used the Silver Oak example before. Even during the recession when nothing was being built, we had between 2,000 and 3,000 so-called approved units. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get built in a very short period of time in terms of growth management. That's what growth management's for, to allocate the number of units for the following year. I've also taken that same map that shows this, and just before this meeting, I've overlaid it onto the school district map. So as I mentioned before, you have attached the school district's comments as well as the individual school things. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I'll allow Andrew Fueling and Mr. Stokes, if they want, we can pull this up, and as they have comments and answer questions, we can use this map to show that. The same with this. This is in your report. The late material has an updated chart. This is from the school district's numbers on the attendance from elementary school, middle school, and high school. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it now, but it's available for your questions and part of this school district's questions. So besides this annual growth man, I know we've had some questions on other things going on, and there are other actions going on. Capacity issues is the primary issues that we're talking about for growth management. One way of a vast number of ways to deal with capacity issues is to limit the number of permits. That's a powerful tool. That's a big thing to take away a property right that somebody has to build a house. Government has to have a good reason to do that. And that's one of the tools. But there are other things going on that I wanted to note. So there's, as I kind of alluded to earlier, we're doing a land use and water capacity analysis, meaning taking all our water rights and available water resources and looking to build out of not only residential but commercial, assigning estimated water usage to all the uses to build out. And we're going to bring that report to you. I actually promised that. I also promised that for you back with the master plan, that annual report. We're still waiting for that to come back and have that discussion with the master plan annual report. Because that primarily does inform master plan decisions as well as rezoning decisions. And I think it's a good time. It's been over 10 years now since we did that analysis with the 2006 master plan, so we'll update that and see where we are. And that's more of a long-term thing. Also, and now the second thing on the list here more directly relates to capacity, and that's discussion on impact fees. And the specific discussion that's going to be coming up this year is for impact fees for fire and streets. Look for in the next month or two, we're going to be going to the Board of Supervisors to establish under NRS the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee. The Planning Commission will be the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee. We have to also add a member from the realtor or building community if we don't already have one. Now that we have one, maybe we don't need to add somebody. We'll look into that. But we'll likely add. It's probably good to add somebody for that specific thing. So that's something that will be coming up for more discussion. So to wrap up my presentation, it's really a status quo recommendation at this point to authorize up to 659 units. That's just based on the latest population numbers and a theoretical 3% growth rate. The distribution between the general and developer categories are just distributed on a percentage based as we historically have. And the recommendation regarding water usage from the Public Works Department is to maintain that threshold of 15,000 gallons per day as the threshold for growth management review. And so that concludes my presentation. I will note we do have members from the Public Works Department, Fire Department, Health and Human Services, Parks and Rec, and as I mentioned, representatives from the school district and transportation, and now from the building industry. we asked somebody from the hospital to attend. They weren't sure they were going to be able to make it. I don't see anybody here now. You do have comments from these departments and agencies that are here in addition to Carson Tahoe Hospital in your packet. So I'd be happy to take questions, and you're free to ask questions of any of these members here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Okay, any questions for Lee or for staff? Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Elise Monroy for the record. Lee, I have some questions about a couple of the numbers. So, okay, all right, so in looking, I know that these numbers represent just an approval of, I think you called it like a status quo approval. So my first question is, if per the Carson City population projections that are established by the state demographer and then even the cities, if our high population is 1.3, our population projection is 1.3%, why are we going to a 3% growth? And then my next, okay, no, go ahead. Oh, yeah, answer it. I've got them all up here. Steel trap, man, steel trap.
Not so much for me, so if I so we're not trying to predict and put a cap, so that we anticipate that will fluctuate in any given year. Again, as I said before, it's we have to think seriously about when we take away somebody's right to build on a residence. We have to have a very good reason to do it. I forget the term is compelling, a compelling government interest, and the burden of proof is on the city to basically take away this property right under the Constitution. It's quite legal. It's it's not widespread over the country, but so we're not trying to predict and just put a cap there and make them keep bumping up to the cap. So I think it is long-term that if it's 3% one year, it's going to be 1% the next, or things over time. So that's just a historic prediction. So the reason you have it in 1 year is because you have periods where you have a lot of projects lined up and coming in. So that might not necessarily mean that for 10 years we're going to have 600 every year, but in 1 year, if we have that many and they can build it, from an economic development standpoint, you want to allow them to do it, have the jobs, have the increased revenues that allow you to provide the services. So again, one tool is to limit growth, to provide capacity. Economic growth is another tool to provide capacity for these services. So I don't have an answer for how to solve all of the capacity issues that we have, and if we did, we would be leading the rest of the country. But does that answer that question?
It does.
Okay.
I think that I was trying to just figure out how we got from a high projection of 1.3 to then allowing our standards to be set at a 3% growth rate. But it sounds to me like but by establishing the 3% growth rate, we're just giving ourselves room so we're not pushing up then against a cap.
I think another way to look at that, the higher one is about 300 units per year. So it's relatively high. And I think that the lower one's about 200, I think that's the range, if I remember correctly, is about 200 per year to 300 units per year average would be those two growth rates.
Okay, so that answers that question. Thank you. My next question, I think it's noted in the packet. I'm pretty sure I read it somewhere, but you had reiterated that, so it's 659 are the residential units that we're going to allocate, but I think then you noted that even industry has said we're probably not going to build 659 units. That's probably not where we're going to get to. So why would we allocate that many units if we don't think we're going to get there? And it looks like historically allocations are set a lot higher than what is actually used? And maybe this just gets back to, we don't want to be bumping up against where we're limiting, rights to build or develop, and maybe that's all that is. But it was just interesting to me that we've said, we know it's going to be this, we're projecting allocating this many, but we don't think we're going to have, industry has even said we probably can't get there.
Well, I'll answer that a different way. So the job of growth management is to set the number for which we have the capacity to grow over the next year or two. Not to predict what it's going to be and ask them what they think they're going to build and put it at that number, but to set it to a number that we can accommodate and still provide the services.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments, questions for staff?
I've got some general questions, but I was wondering, in terms of the different agencies that are here, would it be all right to ask the school district to explain their information, particularly the chart that they submitted?
We want to get the questions for Lee done first, or just go and then hit the different, or whatever works best?
I'd like to save my sort of big picture questions later, if that's all right.
So you'd like the school district to make, would you please come forward, sir? Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Richard Stokes, Superintendent for Carson City School District. Happy to be with you this afternoon. We're hoping your Ouija board works better than ours, but it's a little bit of a mystery right now as to what exactly is going on. We are seeing some growth at this time in our school year that we have not really seen in the past, mostly at the elementary level. We tend to see students at the secondary level about this time of year who might be leaving maybe because they are not planning to graduate. But we've typically seen that trend across the middle schools and also the elementary schools, but that number's a little higher right now, and I'll let Mr. Fueling kind of go through the details of that. So that's just a general trend. One of the other things that is maybe not associated with actual growth, but it's a growth condition that affects us significantly. And I know that Carson Montessori School has been in front of several of the boards with the city. And so there are 284 students there that if they were to end their activity tomorrow, Carson City School District would inherit those students. And we don't have the capacity right now just to outright move those students into our schools. Over time, as we have passed school bonds and looked at the reasons for passing those school bonds and the things that we have gone out and asked our taxpayers to consider, is that we would remove those portable buildings. And right now, if we were to inherit all of the students from Carson Montessori School, we'd have to build another small school to accommodate that growth, and we really don't want to do that. So there's a condition there that I know is a zoning issue, and that impacts Carson Montessori. I talked with Jessica Daniel several times, realizing that our lives are intertwined, and in one way or another, we may have that as a condition that will impact us in general. So I wanted to bring that up just so that you folks knew of our concern and how that might impact not only Carson Montessori School, but also Carson City School District. They are one of ours. We sponsor them. And so we are joined at the hip, as it were, even though they have their own governing board and they manage their own affairs. They do that with support from our school district. And so we're anxious that they succeed. I think that reflects well on us if we're able to show that they're succeeding. And of course, they're very complimentary as well. They run a good program and they have good numbers and have good outcomes and have a group of parents that are very supportive. As are we at the school district. So I will turn the time over to AJ Fueling, our CFO, who is much more astute and may be able to talk at a greater level of detail. But I'm here, obviously, to answer any questions if you have any for me. So this is AJ Fueling.
Welcome.
I like the musical intro. Thank you. AJ Feeling for the record. Thank you again, Commissioners, for having us back. I don't have anything specifically prepared to discuss today. Mr. Plummel did a fantastic job of the overlay of approved developments onto our school district map. That was very well done. I might have to ask Mr. Plummel to help me with some things like that. There's obviously a concern for growth within the district, and in the long run, we obviously expect to grow. There's historically, whatever your city's population is, at least going back to 1980, that's the earliest data I have, between basically 13.5% and 15% of the total city population is Carson City School District students. So as your city grows, obviously we're going to have more kids over time. How they distribute, of course, is dependent not only on where they live, but also the age levels of those students. So there's historical norms there that we track over time as well, and try to have an idea of what the ultimate kind of impact to us will be. And I apologize. I in these discussions, I tend to start thinking really long term, and I realize we're talking about next year. So just remind me of that as we go along. So I think as late material, were you able to give him that last sheet I sent out? Okay. So there was a chart that was sent out a little bit earlier with our statement, just showing projected growth, and I think it's really important just to understand when we're doing growth projections, and even when you're looking at your build out population here in the city, there's a lot of assumptions, and one of the biggest assumptions is that we're looking at historical averages over time, and it assumes that there's this kind of perfect linear growth that just happens, and that is certainly not the reality that we're going to be dealing with. And so a lot of the concern with that comes to you as well, being here and in your positions. So as much as the projections I have kind of show this nice steady increase over time, I don't really expect that. At the same time, I don't know what it really is going to look like either. So for us, it's a matter of knowing what we believe our limitations are, and being able to have some idea of what this will look like in the future. So one of the interesting things, and I think this will maybe help the discussion a little bit when you're considering the district, and maybe you see this too in the overall historical graph. I have the enrollments going back to the 99-2000 school year, and you can see that historically the Carson City School District has had a higher population than it does right now across the board. Those times were different in many ways, and it didn't reflect necessarily the fact that we had the capacity, the what I would call the traditional capacity, so having enough classrooms for kids in our buildings. It reflected having seas of portable classrooms. It reflected having, I think Mrs. Kima calls it team teaching. So you, in an elementary classroom, what's really difficult for us, it's not a bad thing, but it's just difficult to manage, is that you have class size ratios you have to meet. And so if you don't have enough space, for example, if we had 800 kids in Bordewick Bray, there is no way we could meet the class size requirements. So they would end up throwing 2 teachers into one room, with 40 to 50 students to make that work, because then you have the right ratio. You just have a lot more people in one room. So those days with the recession and the need for doing those sorts of things went away, and so now we're kind of coming back to at least talking about what this looks like over time. So going back to what Mr. Plummo may have handed out here really late to you, I was just going to walk you through some of what we're seeing at the school, specifically this year. So for the 17-18 school year, you have the elementaries, middle, and high schools broken out, and then the enrollment at the beginning of the school year against the enrollment at the end of the school year. And I'll tell you that, at least at the elementary level, that is the one level where enrollments are generally pretty static. At least they have been for the last decade, where whatever you started the year with was pretty close to where you ended the year. You'd have a couple in, a couple out. And this year, and this is the first time that we've seen this in quite some time, where we're starting to see an increase of students as the year goes on. And again, it's not across every school, but there are certain ones that stand out. Bordewick, Bray in particular, and then Fritch and Seeliger also. So going down to the middle school level, Carson Middle School, it's not represented here. They've actually lost some students during the school year, but they went up almost 90 kids at the beginning of the school year from the prior. So we saw that bump over the summer, but we've offset some of that as the school year has gone on. And then going down to the high schools, Carson High. Carson High was up about 40 kids to start the year. They very traditionally lose students through the year, as Mr. Stokes mentioned, for various reasons, but oftentimes concerns about graduation. So one of the activities that's been going on the last year is trying to revise our student capacities based upon all of our class size requirements, based upon just changes in programming that have happened, things like going from half-day kindergarten to full-day kindergarten. That actually has a huge impact on our elementary schools, because instead of having most schools have four, or let's say about 100 kindergartners. So you could have 2 classrooms, half of them go in the morning, half go in the afternoon. And it's easy. Well, when you have full-day kindergarten, I need 4 classrooms all day long. So there is an impact to the school with those types of changes. So looking at what I consider what I call traditional capacity, and I don't know if that's a good term or not, but really just given the actual classroom spaces we have, how many kids can we fit in? And I put that in terms of what I believe we have right now, and this is still, I threw this together really quickly for you, so there still could be some fine tuning here. But then also, a year down the road, there's going to be some construction going on, and what some of the impact may be on some of the buildings. So what's interesting is that you see for most of the schools, there is some capacity. There are some available seats, if you want to say that. So what's difficult with the class size ratios we have is that, for example, if we have a requirement in 4th grade that you cannot have more than 25 kids in a classroom. Well, if we have 106 students, we may have to add another teacher, because with 4 teachers, I have pretty much a max of 100 kids. There's some flexibility. But you may add a teacher, while all of a sudden your class sizes drop down to, say, 19 or 20 on average in all your classes. So I guess what's important and why I added this kind of last piece is that a lot of this is about classroom utilization. We only have so many classrooms, and because we can only have so many kids in each class, that classroom utilization actually becomes a little bit more important to us. And this is where our schools have become, or have been over the years, very creative. They have turned spaces that were not meant to be classrooms. They were small tutoring rooms and things like that into classrooms because they had to. But if you're looking at what we truly have for classrooms in these buildings, it shows you how many for each school, how many are being used, and in general they're all being used that I know of, say for one at Eagle Valley right now. And then how many we expect next year. So we have a lot of construction going on in this coming year, during the school year, that will hopefully help us out a year from now and give us some more capacity when it comes to classrooms to use. So again, we can get more creative with how we use our spaces, but just as far as traditional rooms we have that were meant to be classrooms and how they're being used, that's what we see that we have. So I hope that was somewhat helpful, but I'd be happy to take any questions if you have some.
So, as you've said before, in your memo and also last year, sometimes the growth is impacting you at certain elementary schools and it just all comes in. We can't tell the developers only to build in one location, but your suggestion was it would be nice if there was some locational or geographic element to the allocations. But given the way it works now, I'm particularly concerned with Carson Hills Apartments, but is there a thought to look at the attendance boundaries in the next year or two, to really think about the need to change the boundaries, revise them? Fremont's boundary, as you mentioned before, is bizarre. But not only to create a better rezoning for all the different elementary schools, but also maybe look at some changes in terms of socioeconomic issues that are going on. Is that on the books as something that I think you may want to do anyway? But
yeah, absolutely. Mr. Stokes at a prior board meeting a couple months ago brought up that this is something that we very much need to look at seriously. We are kind of halfway into this process now where we using the GIS system, and the city has a great GIS system for looking at property information. We're using something similar to plot students on a map, and we have that part done now. Now there's a part to actually looking at making changes to your zones, and then based upon your capacity, what does that do to that school zone? And then it actually, based on a lot of the information that Mr. Plummel's provided here with the growth, it shows you over time, assuming many things, here's, if you make this change now, does that make sense 5 years from now? And so that is certainly that is something on our mind that we are actively working towards, yes.
But along that same line, if all your schools are close to capacity, I mean, you really don't have much, you're talking a few students here or there. It's not like but if another, like part of one of the projects, if another school went in somewhere, then I guess that would have a lot more impact because you could direct more.
One of the unfortunate things that I think that we're coming to terms with a bit is that as much as going back to 2010 and our facilities master planning process at that time, one of the primary goals was to get rid of all the portable buildings in the district. And I think exactly for the reason you brought up, I don't know that is a reality. The construction we're going to have going on at Fremont and Mark Twain, Pioneer High School, and some other minor projects will certainly help. But there is fear that it may not be enough, and rezoning would certainly help us at the middle school level. There's room at Eagle Valley that we could move over. The elementary level is a little more problematic, but that at least right now is kind of I said it's not exactly what we wanted this to come to. We were hoping to finally get to that point. It just might be a year too late or early, I guess.
Looking at the last page in the enrollment, it looks like both the high school and middle schools are actually down a little bit. It's the grade schools that are kind of close to capacity. And I think we talked about this last year. If more high school space was needed, it'd have to get considerably before you consider building another school, or would you just expand at the existing campus?
That is a discussion yet to be had. Yeah, there's a lot of of politics loaded into that question, and I don't know that we really have a clear answer. What's nice about Carson High is it's a 60-acre plot of land. I mean, there's space out there. At the same time, we're using a lot of that space. So I think we'll always, at some point, when you look out, you look at these historical relationships between population of Carson City and population of the schools, it'll be hard not to have a discussion about another school. I mean, you're going to end up with, I think I have ultimately it's like 37 or 3,800, maybe 3,900 high school students. And I don't know if we want them all in one building, but that's not for me to decide. That'll be a community decision. Thanks.
Other questions?
I do. AJ, on this back page, simplistically, if I was trying to make an argument that the school shouldn't do anything, you're showing that we have 7,500 students and we have capacity for 8,600, which means we have 1,000 places. I know that's not necessarily true, but the difficulty I see is that in your student capacity number here that comes up to 86 is also the baseline number that you're using for your GIS predictions and your rezoning predictions and everything else. Is there a way to make that more real? Or, I don't think you're standing here telling us you got room for another 1,000 kids. I know you don't.
No, I don't believe we do. I mean, it would be it would have to be an absolutely perfect world of I could choose the age of every student and where they're going to be, and that's not what.
Well, but my concern is that this gives the wrong impression, and there ought to be a way that we can show it so that it's more realistic to the average viewer.
And honestly, as I was going through this, I was rushing to get this to you today, and I'm sorry I came as such a late material item. But as I'm looking through this, I knew that question would come up because it doesn't seem to make, and that's specifically why I added that classroom utilization piece, and I at least to kind of temper that a little bit or lend some weight to the other side of that. While in a perfect world we may be able to add student capacity, I wouldn't necessarily argue that. I don't believe it's really this much, and there's still work that we have to do on this. But I do know after walking every school that, I mean, literally every classroom except for one has kids, has a teacher and has kids in it right now.
But if you go back to your rezoning to try and modify that, but you're using this student capacity number, you're going to get the wrong answer, it seems to me.
Right. Yeah.
So you need to use something other than this student capacity line item to make your judgments, or you're going to create a false impression, and that's what.
Sure. Understood.
Go ahead, Commissioner Malone.
I'm done, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are you sure? Yeah. Okay. Your question fed into mine, so thank you. Elise Monroy for the record. So I understand that that these numbers were put together kind of quickly today, but I have questions about the numbers in the memo that you presented, or that the school district provided. So, under question 2, you guys the school district provides some numbers for what you would expect. So what this says is we expect 38 students per 100 single-family detached homes, 20 students per 100 apartment units, 10 students per 100 condos, 30 students per 100 mixed units. How did you guys get at these numbers?
So these are historical, or I should say they're not. They're based on what we are currently seeing in the city. This, as well is a work in progress with our GIS system, but it's, I mean, you're literally looking at every every single family detached home in Carson City, how many kids in Carson City live in that type of housing?
Sure.
And then backing into, so with every 100 homes, you're getting about 38 kids. Now, this again is very, you're making assumptions, right? So if the average value of that home is $600,000, a new home, versus a $250,000 home, I have very different expectations of how many kids I'm going to pull out of that. Same thing with the value of any apartments that are going to be going up. So that has to be taken into consideration as well, amongst other things.
Of course, and I think a lot of what we're doing here, when we're talking about growth management or water utilization or anything, it's assumptions, right? We're basing on projections, so we're not asking anybody to say, we know in a year we're going to have an additional 98 students in each school. But I think for the purposes of land use planning, and as the city's growing, I think we need to know, I think that we need to be as close as we can in our projections of what we should anticipate the impact of the school on the schools to be, as developments or units are being built by right, or when they're coming in and coming here to us. So I think it's important that we can be as transparent as we can be with developers, with the Planning Commission, as to what we're projecting these numbers to be. And then to piggyback on what Commissioner Borders astutely kind of pointed out, was we're seeing issues then even with these numbers. And it looks like we have, so we don't even know really what our actual our current state is according to the data. So if we can just, if it would be helpful to us in making decisions, as well as other bodies, if we can be more clear on how we're making these assumptions.
Absolutely. And in this capacity work that's been going on for this school year, once it is complete and wrapped up and we're able to go through with all the principals and make sure that this seems like it, this seems reasonable, these numbers seem reasonable, it'll be something that is a public document that can be certainly used by your group as well, and we would appreciate that.
Since you brought up a public document, can I have one more question? And then I'll be quiet for a while, I promise. Okay. So in your memo, you noted, or the school district noted that all of our capital funding resources have been approved. And I think this memo might have also referenced the capital funding plan, I think, or the plan. So I went to I did a Google search, and I went to the the facilities master plan. And I went to the facility master plan committee, and I couldn't find the facilities master plan. I was able to kind of click through and find a presentation about the master plan. So with that, I was able to kind of figure out, because my question to you was going to be, if all that money is allocated, what's it going to, if it's not going to building new schools? In looking at the PowerPoint presentation, I could guess, but there was, PowerPoint doesn't come a lot of context. So is there a facilities master plan that looks like the Carson City School District strategic plan, which is a great document that's really easy to find and navigate and understand?
It does not look that nice, and it is not that.
But is there a document that's not a PowerPoint?
Yeah, there is
Okay.
a document. It's it needs to be made to be prettier to present, but yeah, there's a document.
Okay, and then does that document include conversation or information about classroom utilization? Because that was a really interesting conversation today, and I imagine plays into the facilities planning.
Yeah, at that time, when we were planning that, we hadn't done this, really this year, just ending in January, we walked every single school in the district and on a map plotted out every piece along the way and how it's being used. So the conversation at that point was more about the changes. We knew that there were issues related to programming and related to class size ratios and related to full day kindergarten, but what that looked like in each school was not entirely apparent, and now it is much more apparent and concerning.
Okay, great, thank you.
Just a couple quick things. I I know that through your getting rid of the modulars, et cetera, and part of the thing was to have sole entries to where safety for the kids, et cetera. When they were doing these adjustments and changes, were you mainly just looking at rearranging the physical insides of the school, or were some of them actually enlarged, some or whatever? And if so, was it, when you were doing this construction, considered to try to enlarge a little more to handle more capacity, or how was that adjusted?
Sure. Mr. Stokes, you may want to, if I misstep here, but for the most part, if there was new construction that was done, so the money that went towards all these single point of entries had initially been dedicated to do expansions in other buildings. And then Sandy Hook happened and a lot of that changed. So I believe if there was new construction, it generally was because in some of the buildings where their offices were located were either internal within the building or just not in an easily accessible place. So then there might be a new office area that was built so they could have a true single point of entry.
So to get rid of the modulars, as I'm saying, you kind of adjusted the physical insides of the existing schools. There wasn't much where it was adding on to schools or whatever.
Correct. Yeah, not so much.
And if I might again, Richard Stokes, for the record, in our discussions with community members and school personnel that make up our master planning committee, we have looked at what we believe is a reasonable enrollment number for our community and for our schools. And we have 6 elementary schools, and you can see with Mr. Fueling's document that our numbers range from 511 to just over 700. We'd like to limit numbers of our elementary schools to about 650. In order to do that, obviously, you've got to have someplace else to put anybody who's a remainder or who doesn't fit in the initial 6 schools. And so as developers in town begin making plans for new developments, Lampa Ranch we'll use, for example, we worked with those folks and with members of the city staff to get a lot located or a placement for a potential school. Those people have to move in before we have that number of students, and there's got to be some other things that occur, obviously. But as far as adding more square footage, Fremont and Mark Twain are both pretty much identical buildings. And so the work that's been planned to add new square footage at both of those sites, those construction plans look very much the same. It's not me, is it? Okay. The goal there is to get the most bang for our buck as we can, but at the same time, capacity at Mark Twain right now is already over 700, but part of that capacity is being filled with students in portable buildings, whereas Fremont doesn't have that. So even though we're building those 2 structures at both sites, we're really only gaining capacity at Fremont, because by taking away the portables, we have to put students in brick and mortar in order to just accommodate the students that already attend there. So we would like to build permanent structures for all of our campuses. However, to put and accommodate students' educational needs in a short amount of time, that looks like portables again, and that kind of goes in reverse of what we were trying to accomplish. However, if that's what's needed, we certainly would engage our public again, and also our own board and members of that planning master plan committee to let them know what we're looking at and what we're experiencing. Obviously, we can't have school in tents, and we've got to have whatever that next best step would be.
And most likely, through growth, et cetera, the Lampa area, whatever, the plan most likely would be to build another elementary school and then zone to where there's a better balance, correct?
Or some facsimile. It could actually be a building that houses maybe classrooms for grades 1 through 8, and then we come back and add administrative offices later to, just depending on the amount of resources that we have at the time. We're struggling to keep up with some of the costs associated with current economies of scale as it applies to just the building trades in general.
Thank you. Commissioner Tingle.
Yes, I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that the students that are in the elementary schools will eventually make their way up through. So if you build a new elementary school, then you're also looking at, you're at capacity now with your middle schools, so they would go somewhere, and then on up to high school, one would only hope. So it's kind of like a domino effect if you are looking at building a new elementary school, which is sorely needed. Then the next step, do you look at building a new middle school? And for years, we've needed a new high school. That's just a personal aside. And I noted in your letter that you were looking at perhaps dispersing the building permits across different developments so that it's not focused in one specific area. And I'm not sure how that would work as far as developers go. Do you do a lottery, or do you say you get 20, you get 20, you get 20? Especially if you're looking at trying to do a rezoning for the school district, drawing your school areas differently. So I'm not sure how that would be accomplished, and I don't know if you can even answer any of that.
AJ Feeling, for the record. I don't really know that it can be accomplished. I think it's more just stating our optimal situation. You know, I don't think there's really an expectation for that. It would certainly put you in a bad spot in many discussions. So, in your comment about ultimately the high school level, you know, those kids moving up, and it's absolutely true. And you know, it's interesting too, because going from 5th grade to 6th grade, so elementary to middle, and then 8th grade to 9th grade, middle school to high school, it's never an even move. So I know that if I have about 600 5th graders in the district, the next year I'm probably going to have 650 6th graders. We always bring in kids from the private schools. A lot of homeschool parents will start sending their kids at that point. So ultimately, when they do get to high school, you're going to have higher numbers. A couple offsetting factors that help us at the high school is that there has been huge growth in online programming and kids taking online classes. I think we may be at a point now, and I'd have to look back, where on average, every student at Carson or at the high school level takes at least one before they graduate. It's not exactly that. I mean, but just on average, you know, some kids take 5 or 6. So we also have Pioneer that helps, and they're actually adding a little bit of capacity with their construction. The Jumpstart program with WNC has been hugely successful, and that continues to grow. So while there's certainly concern with, you know, growth in population, there are some options at the high school that do help us a little bit to manage that.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Probably the next, no, we're good. Schools being one of the fiscal limit, probably the biggest fiscal limitation might be water. So I think there might be some questions for the folks with water or whatever, correct?
Yeah, I have a sewer question. Sewer. Lee, can you, this chart, can you put that back up? I understand in your letter that we have sewer capacity for the next growth cycle. We were talking about 5 million gallons versus 6 or whatever. I would just wonder somewhere on this line where we would draw the line that says we need a new sewer plant.
Back.
Darren Schultz, Public Works Director, for the record. Well, we monitor the inflow on a monthly basis, and it really does bounce around based on weather. Weather has a lot to do with it. This last year was a very wet year, and as you can see, the average went way up based on that. The other thing is that the amount of flow that are coming out of the typical households has been trending down over the last 10 years, mainly based on plumbing that goes in and less water usage. And so we kind of try to do our best to balance all of those and chart it out as it goes forward. So the way we run our operation is that once we get to a point where we feel that we're going to get close to that 6.9 MGD, we are required by the state to start the planning, analysis, and design of the expansion of our plant. And because of all of the recent work that we have done and built out there, we've made it quite easy to add on an expansion to it. So we looked into the future to make sure that we were prepared to do that. So it's a relatively straightforward design and construction of an expansion to the work that we have just done. So we plan for that. In terms of this number, this chart here, and trying to cross-reference it as it affects sewer, I didn't do that prior to this meeting. That is something that could be developed. Once again, based on a number of guesses, but it's certainly something that could be estimated. But I don't just kind of shooting, from the hip here. I certainly, at the current rate, don't see that within the next 10 years.
Okay, well, I was just using your data of 6.9 million gallons a day as the max, and our current usage is 5.3. So that leaves us 1.6 million gallons a day.
About 20%.
And so somewhere along the way, if we keep adding people to that, we're going to reach that number. And I think what you just told me is that because of the quasi-modular design of what you have, it's fairly easy to add capacity. So it's not a 3-year construction cycle for a new sewer treatment plant. It's just an add-on to what we have. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, well then that's fine.
Any other questions for Water Commission? No? Thank you. Would you like to? Lee? Okay.
Yeah, is that all right? It doesn't appear there are any exemptions under the current growth management system. It's divided between the general property owner and the developers, but there are no exemptions for any type of land use. And I wonder if, for example, if once we get started on accessory dwelling units, in Douglas County, there are exemptions for affordable housing. Affordable housing doesn't have to get allocations. There's exemptions for other things. There's no exemptions for ADUs in Douglas County, but I think that's something we could possibly look at, because right now the growth management system, it's a number game. Same in Douglas County in a lot of ways. It doesn't incentivize where that development's going to be. It's simply the number of permits. And I think, for example, suppose the Carson Hills development was all affordable. I think an argument can be made that they should be exempt from the growth management system. So I'm just wondering if those conversations have come up in the past. It might be something that we may want to look at as we start talking about accessory dwelling units and morphing from guest houses into accessory dwelling units. The other question is, going back to Carson Hills Apartments, some of these developments clearly have taken many years to build out, and some of that's recession, and I expect that some of these other developments that have come online recently are going to come online and build out much quicker. In terms of Carson Hills Apartments, though, to me, an apartment complex, I don't normally see that as happening in phases. An apartment complex, whether it's 100 units or 150 units, they'll come in for that building permit to do all those units at the same time. So it worries me with the Carson Hills Apartments, which is 370 units. My sense is they're not going to phase that. They've got the financing to build 370 units. So would that be not correct that they would come in for those allocations as a developer for 370 units, or would that not be how Carson City would handle that kind of a development?
Answering the last question regarding for example, the Carson Hills Apartments, if they pulled building permits for 370 units, there would need to be 370 growth management allocations available for them to pull at that time. I think I don't know, your first one was there was more of a statement. If the question in there is, have we discussed before any exemptions? So these are actually, a growth management unit is only for the unit connecting to the water system. So actually, we don't require it. For the outliers that are still on well water to get a well permit, they don't need a growth management allocation. It's rare in the number. It's such a minuscule amount of the number of permits that go through. It's just not factored into this, but there's that exception. But there hasn't been discussions or any significant discussions in the past about having exemptions for affordable housing, as you say.
Mr. Tingle.
Based on your comment, Mr. Plemmel, I did a search on the census information, and the Carson City median income is $49,832. And right now, the median sales price on a house is $292,896. $292,896. So the likelihood of someone with an income of $49,832 being able to qualify to purchase a median-priced home here in Carson City is slim and none. So my concern is that we try to focus some attention on doing some affordable housing and disperse it throughout the community, not centralize it in one or two locations, that we take a lot of time to consider that, and I don't know if that's in our purview or not, but I believe that is something that we do future citizens a disservice if we don't start looking at that.
Along that line, though, how do other areas, or what area, I mean, if you're a builder and you're going to build something and you're going to sell it for X, how do you tell them you got to build something you're going to sell for Y, to the point that he says, okay, it's not worth it, whatever. I mean, I don't know if that's within our parameters anyway, is it? Or how do people deal with that in other areas?
Yeah, affordability of workforce housing is a problem in a lot of places, not just here, certainly in this region and in this state. So just addressing that issue, you asked, how is this applicable to growth management? Probably not much, other than one of the things that affects housing costs is the availability of housing for purchase. So being able to build enough. So certainly, an extreme limit would make prices go up. That would not help affordability, certainly. But there is there's a committee formed within the city now that's looking at that as alternatives for workforce housing and other affordable housing products, and figuring out how to get to address that issue. I mean, it's a very tough issue. There's others working on it, so it's not really a growth management issue per se, but there are city departments working on it. I'm sure as things come through, we'll keep you updated on that.
Lee, what committee is that, and when do they meet?
Yeah, it's not an appointed committee by the board. It's through the Health and Human Services Department, and it looks like Nikki Aker with Health and Human Services could tell you more.
Hi, for the record, Nikki Aker, Director, Carson City Health and Human Services. So we have a housing subcommittee that is part of our Carson City Behavioral Health Task Force. That Behavioral Health Task Force has 7 different subcommittees, and housing is one of them. And we have many different city departments on that committee, along with various representation of builders and developers, and we feel we have the right people at the table.
Okay, I'm sure you do, and I look forward to pulling up the agenda and attending when I can. I'm excited to hear that housing is a conversation about behavioral health, because affordable, stable housing is like a pillar central, so important to that conversations about the social determinants of health. So I'm really glad that you guys are being so mindful in your scope and person-centered. So I look forward to attending.
Okay, I'll forward you the invite.
And maybe you can kind of keep us abreast of what's going on with that. That would be great.
Sure, I can
Updated
do
kind of as to what they're doing. That'd be super. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Go Commissioner Tingle.
Nikki?
Nikki?
I know as part of the Community Health Improvement Planning Group, workforce development is one of the pieces that they're looking at, along with the food and nutrition and access to health care, which I'm really sorry that Carson Tahoe isn't here. I know they did respond with they have capacity for patients at Carson Tahoe, which is really not where the problem lies. The problem lies with access to primary care, which would then preclude people from ending up in the hospital. But I think that once we can get that plan in place and get it out, that I think it'll help a lot. And I know that's not part of our purview to talk about access to health care, but it's just something that I think we need to be mindful of when we talk about development.
Right. And just for explanation, I'll give you real quick what she's talking about. So outside, as part of the health department and as the community, we've done a community health needs assessment. And then there were some priority areas that we're looking at. And this is where we're doing the Community Health Improvement Plan, which Ms. Tingle is part of as part of access to health care. And what that kind of looked at was there's issues with individuals with Medicare, Medicaid getting their medical needs met. Some of that is also transportation. And so this is what this group is working on, is looking at some objectives that they can work on and maybe help at least lessen the amount of people that are not able to see a primary care physician. The Carson City Behavioral Health Task Force is also part of that, the Community Health Improvement Plan, as is the housing. So.
Hi, Nikki. Terry Preston for the record. I have a question for you. The housing that you're looking at, are you looking at the lower income subsidized, or anybody looking at the middle? Because I'm seeing a disparity between the low and the high, but there doesn't seem to be anybody looking at the middle. Are you looking at that?
We are looking at that, and we at the beginning we were calling it affordable housing, looking at also like the Section 8 housing, that we're trying to put people into, but we've since changed that and called it workforce housing. So it's looking at that for our workforce in addition to the other.
Thank you, because I think that's basically where we have a need. Thank you.
Bring it back to the Commission. Any more questions for anybody?
I have a question for Lee.
Commissioner.
Following up on what Hope was talking about. If the Clearview Apartments were to come in and pull 370 building permits, do you have the capacity to go into the non-developer pool and to make up the difference if a developer came in looking for something in excess of the 370?
So the way it's distributed and when those become available is on attachment C. There's not a page number on it, but it's right after the resolution, right after the draft resolution. So they start after the first 3-month period. So yeah, at the end of March. So we're in the second period when some of those do become available. Not all of them, but most of any leftovers in the general become available. And then at the end of 6 months, it's wide open to first come, first serve. All of them are.
Any other questions for staff or anyone? Okay. Again, we'll call for possible public comment Is there any more public comment on the growth management?
Good afternoon. For the record, Aaron West, CEO of the Nevada Builders Alliance. Since I'm here, I thought I'd speak up. I heard some great dialogue, and certainly anytime we contemplate, significant growth, there becomes, significant concerns. We feel that we're working very diligently with staff to address a lot of those concerns. We're comfortable with the growth management numbers. As Lee has indicated, there's a couple reasons why we think it really might not necessarily come into play. But I think in terms of the one thing I would say is we're excited to see the diversity of housing product that's being submitted and brought to permit. Unfortunately, going back to the affordable piece, we have seen on average about 50% increase in material costs in the last 2 years as a result of some natural disasters and demand. Still our number one issue continues to be workforce. So, we're excited to see all those kids at Carson High School. We just wish they all had shop classes so that we could get them into the industry, right? That is our number one issue. But, I know you guys take some heat from time to time on these projects and approvals, and some of the folks that may not want to see that growth, but I would submit to you that the job creation that's taking place now and not the speculative development is really what's driving this. And I think that is going to add so much to this community, bringing in working class families, and what that's going to contribute. The other side of that is from a pure revenue standpoint, the idea that the homes being built now are the only ones that are actually paying full price in their property taxes. We all know that because of our flawed property tax system here in Nevada, even houses that were built in the last boom cycle have already depreciated 15%. And because of the cap that's in place, the bills were only able to go up 0.2% this time. So those are structural issues that we have issues with as well, and we'd like to see addressed. But we feel like we really need that new construction in order for the city to receive its full benefit. In terms of infrastructure, the industry did agree to a 5 times increase in the water and sewer connection fees, phased in over time. So we're looking at implementation of that. We're currently in discussions with the city on potential impact fees, and we know, as the school district pointed out, they were successful in negotiating some fees on another project. So that's a real struggle, right? We talk about affordability, and at the same time, then there's these financial needs that we need to. So I appreciate what you guys do on a daily basis. We know it's not easy. As an industry, we're here to support and contribute, and let me know how we can help. Thank you.
Other public comment?
For the record, Maxine Neitz. Couple of things that have been said here. One that was said by Mr. Plemmel as well as Mr. West just now about the revenue involved and the costs involved. It's been a truism for many, many years, and it's not changed at all. Residential growth does not pay for itself, whether that's the fault of a property tax cap or what is causing that. It is a known fact, and as you increase residential growth, you're going to increase the city's inability to afford those homes and the services that those families will require. Mr. Plemmel mentioned something about we can't take away a person's right to build unless there's a compelling government reason. I don't know Carson City. I'm sorry. Within my recent memory, this city has approved homes on earthquake faults. So I don't know what you would call a compelling government interest. I am sorry to hear that things like that are happening, that we're approving homes on earthquake faults. Eventually, Mother Nature will win. And there'll be loss of life, there'll be damage, and other problems that we as a city will have to face. And those problems, of course, will cost money to fix. And then I wanted to also kind of follow up on Commissioner Monroy's statement about the population growth figures and why the population growth figures are in one level and the growth management is at such a much higher level, even though most of those allocations are not being sought, and traditionally over the last 10 years or so they're not being sought, we could easily lower the allocations without bumping into anybody's cap or anything like that. And there's been no discussion here at all of the fact that the developer allocations the developers always want higher density than what the land is zoned for. If they buy something where there's 1 acre zoning, the first thing they'll do is develop a plan for 3 homes per acre, 4 homes per acre, 5 homes per acre, and they'll come in front of you and request a PUD or a special use permit. And there's been no discussion of how those type of allocations affect the future growth. When I was a commissioner, our ultimate grow out population of Carson City was 70,000. Now it's 75. I'm not sure how that happened, but I'm seeing it happen that the developer portion of the allocation is always asking for more units than what the land is zoned for. And in fact, in some cases, they're asking for residential land to be zoned commercial so that they can bump that density way, way up. So those are issues that I think that you should consider as you consider this growth management, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Bring it back to the commission for discussion or a motion.
If there's no discussion, I'll make a motion.
Commissioner Monroe.
Okay, with my motion, I'd like to thank all the agencies that were here today and prepared information. That was great and really thorough. Lisa Monroy, for the record, I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of a maximum of 659 residential building permit entitlements for 2019, with an allocation of 283 entitlements for the general property owner category and 376 entitlements for the development category, and to continue the commercial and industrial development annual average water usage threshold of 15,000 gallons per day for Growth Management Commission review and distribution and allocations for future years as further provided in the draft Board of Supervisors resolution.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second from Commissioner Stillwell. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We'll
Take a break.
close the Growth Management Commission meeting and...
Mr. Chairman, I know you've asked for public comment on that last item, but let's ask for one more general public comment.
Oh, okay.
Just to establish that for the record before we adjourn. For growth management.
For Growth Management, we'll ask for any other one. Want to make public comment on the Growth Management side? Thank you. So we will adjourn the Growth Management, take a short break, and reconvene as the Planning Commission in 5 minutes or 10 or so. reconvene as the Planning Commission. I guess do we need a roll call for?
Chair Sattler,
Yes.
Vice Chair Borders,
Here?
Commissioner Eswine,
Here?
Commissioner Monroy, Commissioner Preston, Commissioner Stoll, Commissioner Tingle. A quorum's present.
Thank you. Public comment. The public is invited at this time to comment on and discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of the Planning Commission, including any matters that is not specifically included in the agenda as an action item. Is there any public comment at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on. G1 SUP-18-066 for possible action to consider request for a special use permit for a billboard on property zone General Industrial GI located at 8025 Highway 50 East, APN 008-611-04. Hope?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request for the continuation of a billboard on Highway 50 just west of the V&T where the V&T Railroad passes over Highway 50. The subject property is zoned general industrial and the site is surrounded by land that is zoned general industrial. The billboard was originally put in place in 2003 and was renewed in 2008 and in 2013. Section 4.8 of the development standards includes billboard regulations. Per the development standards 4.8.3A2, a special use permit issued for the sign expires automatically 5 years from the date of issuance. The existing billboard will expire on May 31st, thus the request for a special use permit so that the billboard can remain another 5 years. When you consider a special use permit, you are considering the 7 findings of fact. Staff has reviewed each of the findings of fact and was able to make each of them in the affirmative, and the staff is recommending approval. Neil Johnson of Yesco, the applicant, is present, and I'm happy to answer any questions or go in depth on anything for the commission. Thank you.
Any questions for staff? Commissioner Stowell.
The property itself is in not great shape, and the existing sign is next to an abandoned structure of a sign that has not been taken down. There are also power lines going from the storage building to the billboard sign. I've not seen that on the other SUPs that we've been dealing with on billboards. So again, when you have the situation where, yes, it's income to the property owner, but the property itself is not in great shape. The abandoned sign structure that is right next to the existing Yesco sign is still standing there, so you've got an abandoned structure. And I don't think on just these things, it's appropriate for us to look at renewing this until these things are taken care of. And I would have a hard time recommending approval of a special use permit.
Thank you. Ask if there are any other comments. Would the applicant come forward, please?
I'm Neil Johnson, representing Yesco.
First of all, you've seen the conditions of approval, and are you fine with all of this?
Yes.
Anything you would like to add to Hope's presentation or to the staff presentation?
We're not planning on having any changes for the proposed grandfathered sign, and yes, Yesco agrees to the conditions.
Any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Stowell.
Why do you have power lines stretching over across from the building? Why is there not electricity directly to the sign?
I'm going to have to get back with you on an answer to that. Sometimes we run power through the buildings and meter it separately from the landowner. I don't know if that's the case for this one. I'll check with our operations manager. Let me get back with you on that. but we just run power to the sign to, get the lights on it.
To clarify, do you have other signs that are wired the same way, obvious, I'm
In a
guessing?
similar manner, yes.
Okay, thank you. It's for the applicant. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any public comment about this issue? Seeing none, I'll bring it back for discussion or a motion.
I have a quick question for staff.
Commissioner Monroy, go ahead.
Lisa Monroy for the record. Are there code or city standards regarding, I guess, wiring of signs? It seems odd to me that we would be, okay.
Lee Plemmel, Community Development Director. I was going to ask, there's two things, the abandoned sign and then the power. So if it was done today, the service line would have to be put underground. So we'd have to go back and look at that and see if they had a permit to do it that way. Then that's back when it was done, a long time ago, that's how it was done. Certainly a service line today would have to be underground and not hanging across there. The other one, the abandoned sign. So I just started looking at the code, but I'm sure we have some regulations on abandoned signs, so I'll have code enforcement look into that issue separate from that's not a billboard, that's not part of this. It looks like some other sign on the property, but based on your comment, I'll have code enforcement look into that, and we do have sign code regulations regarding abandoned signs.
And that's why I clarified with the applicant that they have other signs wired in a similar fashion, I'm sure from probably that era or whenever those were done.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
That kind of goes back to what we talked about before when we did the consent agenda on all these signs about how many times do we renew the special use permit and allow standards that we don't allow anymore to continue, and when do we say, okay, now it's time to fix it? I mean, why couldn't we ask them to put that electric line underground?
So generally speaking, in terms of the billboard standards, they all comply with the billboard standards in that section of the code. So that electrical, in other words, they've all been brought down to the height, they've all been limited down to the size requirement and those requirements, so they all currently meet the sign code. That would be, that's another development standard about the undergrounding of service lines. So if this was done, it's possible that we'd have to go back and look at the time. The current development standards were adopted in 2002. Whether or not that specific standard was in place before that, we'd have to do some research.
Well, the 2002 is 16 years ago.
Again, any further discussion or a motion?
Public comment.
All right, I did call for public comment on this, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll make a motion. I move to approve SUP-18-066, a special use permit request to allow the continuation of an existing billboard sign on property zone general industrial located at 8025 Highway 50 East, assessor parcel number 008-611-04, based on the findings and subjects to the conditions of approval on the staff report.
I'll second.
Mr. Ramos seconds. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
Two.
Commissioner Borders and Commissioner Stowell were nay. G2 VAR-18-065 for possible action to consider request for variance to the front, side, and rear setbacks so as to allow setbacks of 7 feet, 5 feet, and 10 feet respectively where required setbacks are 10 feet, 10 feet, and 20 feet respectively on property zone residential office RO located at 213 South Nevada Street, APN 003-114-08. Hope?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The applicant is, and I've sort of put on the board for you an overview of the request, but the request is a variance to the front side and rear setbacks, so as to allow setbacks that are 7, 5, and 10 feet respectively, where the required setbacks are 10 feet, 10 feet, and 20 feet respectively. The applicant is seeking to redevelop a 2,365 square foot lot in the downtown area by demolishing an existing home on the site and building a new home. The minimum lot size in our RO zoning district, which is the zoning of the subject property, is 6,000 square feet, and the required setbacks are crafted for that lot size. Therefore, the lot is a non-conforming lot. It's less than 50% of the minimum lot size required for the subject zoning district. The existing building on the site is non-conforming, and it violates the setback. I put up a copy of the site plan that you have in your packet, which outlines the property lines as well as the existing building footprint and the proposed building footprint. The subject lot, and I have an aerial photograph up right now, is actually, the property owner of the subject lot actually owns the property next door that has the garage on it. The garage is proposed to be retained. These two lots are surrounded by a parking lot. This site is actually in our historic district, so I want to take a minute just to give an overview of the actions of the Historic Resource Commission. The Moores, who are the property owners, I think have been through in front of the Historic Resource Commission 3 times. The Historic Resource Commission has found that the subject building that's existing on the site is a non-contributing building. As such, they have approved the demolition of that building, but demolition cannot occur until building plans for a new building are approved. The Historic Resource Commission has reviewed the building plans that are in your packet and have approved those. But their approval is subject to the applicant obtaining a variance from the Planning Commission. So your action is independent, but nothing you're doing would be in conflict with the Historic District, nor is anything that they did in conflict with you. You're acting independently based on this variance. The Planning Commission does have the authority to grant a variance upon making 3 findings. The findings are 1, that there's special circumstances applicable to the subject property, including the shape, size, topography, and location of surroundings. Clearly, this lot is far smaller than was contemplated for the required setbacks, and staff can make this finding based on the size of the lot. Number 2 of 3 findings, it's necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of substantial property rights. Given the depth of this lot, there's barely a building envelope. I think it was a 15-foot depth was left for a building envelope. I think any building on this site will require, any building that would be occupied as a residence would require, or even an office for that matter, would need to violate the setbacks. And thirdly, the granting of the variance will not adversely affect to a material degree the health and safety of persons residing in the neighborhood or be materially detrimental to the public welfare or materially injurious to property or improvements in the neighborhood of the subject property. Again, this is an unusual site in that this property with the garage are surrounded by a parking lot. Encroaching into these setbacks is not compromising anybody's privacy or peacefulness. In fact, it's causing the occupant to be closer to what could be considered the conflicting land use, the parking lot, but the parking lot is there. So given the size of the lot and the setting of the property, the staff is able to make the required findings in the affirmative, and we are recommending approval of this request. David and Donna Moore are present, and they are the property owners and the applicant, and I'm happy to answer questions.
And to clarify this, it's basically using the existing footprint. The existing building is out of compliance and the rear and side, et cetera, as well, correct?
Right, it's not a perfect match, in fairness, but the existing building does encroach, and this building will also have encroachments.
Questions for staff? I have one. Commissioner Borders.
Hope, the garage is on the property line of the lot line, correct, of the lot it occupies?
Correct, the garage is on its own property.
Okay. Is the garage going to stay as part of this house?
At this point, the applicant has indicated an intent to keep the garage and has not sought permission from the Historic Resource Commission for demolition.
Okay. It would just seem to me that if you replatted the thing into one lot, you could solve some of the other problems also.
I think you'd still have problems because you'd likely want a garage, so you'd kind of be in the same boat.
Fair enough.
So Hope, for them to do even anything with the garage has to go through the historic district as well?
Correct. This is in the Historic District overlay, so any activity on these sites is subject to review by the Historic Resource Commission. Also, and I might be mistaken, so I shouldn't say it, but I think I'm right, I believe he changed out the garage doors recently. Yes, they're nodding, so that's true. So they have made some improvements to the garage building.
Thank you. Other questions for staff? Would the applicant like to come forward, please? If you would, state your name for the record, please.
Dawn Moores.
David Moores. First of all, you've seen the conditions of approval by staff. You accept those conditions? Yes. It's part of the, okay. Thank you. Questions for the applicant? That was easy. I guess we're good. Thank you. Public comment. Anyone at this point wish to make public comment on this particular item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to my commission for motion or discussion or a motion.
I just have a comment, and I mentioned this to Hope when I picked up my package, but see how this is in the downtown district, and it seems to me that the setbacks that are required here are overly strict for this particular type of zoning district. And I wonder if it might be possible at some point to look at revision of those. Right, or even in the downtown district. I mean, it just seems like 20 feet for a front
It's a
setback.
residential office, so it is the same as the other historic houses that aren't typically this small, but they are smaller lots. So it's not the downtown district, which has 0 setbacks.
Right,
This is in a different setback that has the same.
It would make it. I mean, somebody could propose to do something in that parking lot, for instance, if it weren't a city parking lot, and possibly do something that was more dense than what's currently allowed in the residential office. And because of its proximity, I just think that 20 feet for a setback is pretty significant. So I'm just suggesting that perhaps it's something that we, as a planning commission, can look at in the future.
Commissioner, I think you clarified. I was going to ask, so that parking lot is owned by the city?
It's zoned P. Is the ownership city?
Yeah.
Yes, the ownership is city.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, Commissioner Eswine is pointing out that there are unusual circumstances with this property, but I think we could look at RO properties in general and look at the setbacks in RO for other standard ones. I want to say they were reduced at some time in the past to allow some flexibility and reduction. I could be wrong about that, but I think you point out that this is a very unusual property even within that residential office zoning district.
Any further discussion or a motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Waters.
I move to approve variance, or VAR 18-065, a variance requested to allow setbacks of 7, 5, and 10 feet respectively, where the required setbacks are 10, 10, and 20 feet respectively on property zoned residential office located at 213 South Nevada Street, APN 003-114-08, based on the findings and subject to the recommended conditions of approval in the staff report.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Peterson, second. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? 7-0. Good luck. Preston, I'm sorry, I said Peterson. I apologize. I can't read my own writing. I just realized that. Okay, G-.3 SUP-18-068. For possible action, consider a request to amend special use permit SUP-14-081 to expand the medical marijuana dispensary and retail marijuana use by 1,264 feet on property zone general commercial GC located at 2765 Highway 50 East, APN 008-312-12. Hope?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The request is to expand the existing 2,450 square foot medical marijuana dispensary and retail marijuana store by 1,294 square feet by expanding into the neighboring tenant space. The subject property is east of the interchange of 50 and 580, as shown on the map that I've displayed for you. Per the development standards 1.20, the expansion of the medical marijuana establishment, I'm sorry, let me start that one over. Per development standards 1.20, the expansion of a medical marijuana establishment or marijuana establishment by 10% or more requires an amendment to the special use permit. The original special use permit for medical marijuana dispensary was approved in October 2014. In October 2017, the Board of Supervisors adopted Ordinance 2017-21, creating land use regulations governing recreational marijuana. Per these regulations, a recreational marijuana use was allowed to co-locate with a medical marijuana establishment in good standing without requiring a special use permit. Consequently, this site is currently occupied by a medical marijuana dispensary and a marijuana retail store use. These uses are established. The applicant is proposing to expand into the neighboring tenant space as shown on the site plan that's in your packet. The location is a small shopping center where the other tenants are an electrical shop and 2 automobile service facilities. Per the development standards 1.20 established the minimum standards for medical marijuana establishments and marijuana establishments. The staff report reviews every single one of those standards and has found compliance with those standards. Staff has consulted with the sheriff's office and no modifications to the security system are proposed. As we've discussed in the past, when you're considering a special use permit, you need to make each of the 7 required findings in the affirmative. Staff has reviewed those findings in the staff report and was able to make those in the affirmative, and we are recommending approval. The applicant, Will Adler, is present, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Hope you mentioned the security system. Were any other modifications needed as far as entryways, locks, whatever, to that part of the building, or do they all up to standard?
Because the development standards require that there be a single front door for the public, I have asked for in the recommended conditions of approval, I'm seeking clarification as part of the tenant improvement to verify compliance with that code section. But otherwise, there weren't mandated ones. I just wanted to check in with the sheriff's office to see if they had any observations that would lead us to want to revisit the security systems and seek any type of enhancements, and they had no suggestions.
Any other questions for staff, Commissioner Borders?
Hope on this floor plan, it calls this a call center. Are we going to have a call center for a marijuana dispensary?
I speak to that in the staff report. You're correct. They call it a call center. I think just like I'm going to pick on I'm not going to pick on a retail store, but at a retail store, we tend to recognize a retail store as a retail store. We don't worry about what they decide to display in the front of the store or in the back of the store. And so although they've shown that floor system, my staff report and my review of the standards and my review of the findings contemplates just a retail medical marijuana and marijuana retail store. I I haven't really contemplated that that call center will forever be there. And I also don't want to do anything that would prevent the applicant from making that a different type of space if we feel we can make the findings.
Other questions for staff? Seeing none, would the applicant like to come forward, please?
Hello, I'm Will Adler, representing WSCC Inc. today with their marijuana dispensary expansion.
Well, and you've seen the conditions of approval, and you accept all those conditions as written?
Yes, I do.
Great, thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
You want to talk about the call center?
Be glad to. So, yeah, labels are labels, but in a big portion of this industry and this business is trying to be convenient and have time to talk to, especially medical marijuana patients and older patients. They do get a lot of call-ins and a lot of pre-order call-ins. People want to call in an order ahead of time so they can get in and out efficiently. So in the redesign, I mean, I believe the electrical company is now gone in that parking lot. That's the space they've taken over next door. It's going to be the same front door, same entry lobby there you see with the glass. That's not changing, same secure entrance. The lobby has gotten a little wider with this, and then the new space to the side is going to be used for an additional vault space and storage, and then this call center space to the side, which is basically going to be a service space back office essentially for the dispensary. So they'll have a couple extra computers back there, a couple extra, call center type operations, but it's still the same facility for recreational and medical marijuana dispensing. Another thing too is with this, they do get a lot more of the parking lot. That was a big issue, was they're sort of limited to the parking space to the side here and the ones in the middle, and they're sharing a space with an automotive group that already uses a lot of the parking lots. So this way they have the right to use more parking spaces without, ruffling anybody. So the landlord actually preferred this. So that's why we took it over.
So I'm not going to get a robocall with your phone number on it?
No, you're not going to get one of those. Unless you call in, nobody's going to call you back from that.
All right, thank you.
Numbers.
Thank you.
Other questions of the applicant? Thank you, sir.
And briefly on security, there's still going to be the cameras, the locked doors, the sensors, the alarms. But the main import where you process the marijuana coming in is still in the back, still in the lock gated area in the back, and then the entrance is still for the public right there. That will be a employee only scan card entrance, just to get in there, but it's not open to the public. There's another door, but it's not the front door of the facility. It's not for the public.
Great, thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
Call it back for discussion or a motion. Wait, excuse me, public comment. Anyone wish to comment on this item before we bring it back? Seeing none, I'll bring it back for discussion or a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Motion for Commissioner Tingle.
I move to approve SUP-18-068, a request to revise special use permit SUP-14-081 to allow an expansion of a medical marijuana dispensary and retail marijuana use by 1,294 square feet on property zoned general commercial located at 2765 Highway 50 East, APN 008-312-12, based on the findings and subject to the conditions of approval contained in the staff report.
I have a motion for Commissioner Tingle. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Stowell. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No comment from the people,
Okay. G4, MPA-17-185, for possible action to adopt a resolution recommending to the Board of Supervisors approval of a master plan amendment from Blackstone Development Group, Inc., to create a new specific plan area for 26.89 acres of existing Lapa Ranch specific plan area located at the east end of Railroad Street between Solomon Road and Railroad Street, APN 010-051-44. Hope?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For both of these items, the Planning Commission is making a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. So these items will be considered by the Board of Supervisors for final action. You are acting as a recommending body this evening. I'm going to present both the master plan amendment and the zoning map amendment as in a single report. They are two separate items which will require two separate actions. Does he need to read the title? Did you read the title of the zoning map?
No.
Does he need to read it?
Should I read that one?
If you wouldn't mind.
That would be G5, ZMA-17-186, for possible action to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of a zoning map amendment from Blackstone Development Group, Inc., to change the zoning from agricultural A to single-family 6,000 SF6 on 26.89 acres of existing Lapa Ranch specific plan area located at the east end of Railroad Street between Solomon Road and Railroad Street, APN 010-051-44.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I forgot to talk to you about that. Okay, so as I had just said, only the Board of Supervisors may amend the master plan, and only the Board of Supervisors may amend the zoning map. This request is for the adoption of the Blackstone Ranch specific plan. It's for a 27-acre area. Let me go back where I was, sorry. For a 27-acre area at the east end of Railroad Drive. I will mention there might be a tiny bit of confusion because in the master plan, they refer to Railroad Drive as a railroad street. So you'll often hear me calling it Railroad Street because that's what the master plan calls it. And the residents might say, but it's Railroad Drive. Why is she calling it Railroad Street? But that's where we are. The proposed specific plan addresses design standards and guidelines and public services and infrastructure. It is not a development proposal. We do not have a development proposal in front of us. Instead, this is creating the development rules, or what I'm going to call the rules of the game. It helps future development, it will let future development know what the rules are, so when someone goes to develop this property, they'll understand what are the rules and the parameters they need to be operating within. I'm going to start broad, and then I'm going to get more specific, because I want to spend some time on framework. I've had a number of neighbors come and talk to me about this, and I think understanding the framework's really important to understanding how this product operates. We're going to start with the city's master plan. The city's master plan was adopted in 2006. This is a map of the whole city, and it shows you all the different land use designations. The master plan provides for written goals and guiding principles, policies, and recommended actions. In combination with the land use map, it provides guidance for decisions affecting growth, the use, and the development of land, preservation of open space, and expansion of public facilities and services. So every time you're looking at a special use permit, a lot of the discretionary permits you're reviewing, the questions always pose the finding of fact, is this consistent with the master plan? And you have to make an affirmative finding of yes, this is consistent with the master plan. So this is the master plan for the whole city. Within the master plan, adopted again in 2006, there are 4 areas that were identified as specific plans. Those 4 areas were the area near the eastern end of the city at the V&T specific plan area, and you recently looked at Draco Way over there. Okay, and that was because that's kind of an entryway. They looked at it as an opportunity for economic development and commerce and kind of mixed-use development with the presence of the V&T. You also have the Brown Street specific plan. That's a specific plan because that was sort of a troubled part of the city that needed extra attention in terms of development standards. And you've looked at some projects in that area and looked at those against the specific plan for compliance. Schultz Ranch was a specific plan, and Lampa is a specific plan. Lampa is a specific plan, my guess is, because Lampas have been ranching. They're still running cows on that land. And so the city said, well, gosh, this is a lot of land. We know it should develop comprehensively. We're going to come up with some broad standards for the comprehensive development and policies. But for every piece of the Lampa Ranch that develops, before it can come in and just develop, it has to do its own specific plan. It has to be consistent with our master plan, and it has to get a rezoning. So when we look at our Lampa specific plan, and this is in your packet, The area within the blue broad boundary is the Lampa Specific Plan area. You may remember the area to the north of 5th Street is the North Lampa Specific Plan. We have a specific plan for that area. We're now looking at the 27-acre area at the east end of Railroad Street. It's south of the city's linear park. It's kind of isolated out there. In the city's master plan, it says that's going to be medium-density residential. The master plan has a lot of policies about Lampa Ranch, and if you read your report, you'll see I call out every single one of those policies, and I speak specifically to every single one of those policies and how this proposed specific plan, the Blackstone Ranch specific plan, is consistent with the Lampa Ranch specific plan. I'm not going to go through all those policies tonight. Instead, I'm going to talk about 3 of the policies. The first one I'm going to talk about is Lampa Ranch Specific Plan Policy 1.2, a mix of land use. Well, how can this be a mix of land use when we're only looking at medium-density residential? So I just want to remind the commission, when the board in 2006 said Lampa Ranch will be a mix of land uses, they're looking at everything within that blue boundary, not just this 27-acre area. What the board said is this 27-acre area south of the linear park at the end of Railroad will be medium-density residential. Probably because of the isolation of it, probably because of neighboring uses, but that's what the designation is. So I think this contributes to the mix of land uses within Lampa Ranch, and I find it to be consistent with Policy 1.2, which calls for the mix of land uses. Policy 1.5 talks about compatibility with the existing neighborhood. I suspect we have a lot of residents from the neighborhood to the west present with us today. They've come to see me. Before they ever came to see me, though, when I was all by myself in my office, and Lee was there, we knew the compatibility with that neighborhood at Railroad was important. And that zoning, when you look at that property that's just to the west, is single-family 21,000 PUD. So you might think to yourself, well, that's a half-acre lot. How are these 6,000 square foot lots going to be compatible with a half-acre lot? They're actually not half-acre lots. When you look at the lots on Trolley and the lots on the south side of Railroad, they're in the 7,000 square foot range. The ones on the north side of Railroad are about 1 acre. So I find that the idea of going with medium-density residential is consistent. The area currently around Railroad is also medium-density residential. Additionally, the proposed Blackstone Ranch specific plan includes a policy 2.1.1b. It says neighborhood density shall properly relate to adjoining developed areas and provide for transition between neighborhood types. Property transitions that include feathering of density / lot size, landscape buffers, or walls and fences that serve to identify community boundaries. So the policies of this specific plan, or as I like to call it, the rules of the game, when they're creating the rules of the game, they're saying we want to be compatible with our neighbors. And part of being compatible may be feathering our lot sizes. It may be walls. It may be fences. It may be landscape buffers. So they're offering that in the policies. This would be, if it's approved, implemented at the time of development. So if a tentative map came in, when the tentative map came in, I'd say, okay, just like I did for this proposal, here are all the policies that they have to adhere to. And here's how they're complying, or if they're not complying, and I'm recommending a condition of approval. So because of the similarity in the lot sizes between in the 7,000 range and in the 6,000 range, and because of this policy 2.1.1.b, I do find consistency with policy 1.5 of the Lampa Ranch specific plan. Okay, and the last of 3 policies I want to highlight for you, and this is our biggie, roadway linkages. When you look at this, you might think to yourself, well, gosh, how are they going to get there? Railroad. Well, actually, the Board of Supervisors thought about that back in 2006. And in the Lampa Ranch specific plan, they called for a general vehicular circulation network that would include a minimum, a collector road from 5th Street to Railroad Street across the linear park. So that's that black line you see on the map. So, but The applicant only controls the 27 acres south of the linear park, not the area to the north of the linear park. So it's 3.6 of the Blackstone Ranch specific plan calls for the extension of Railroad Street as a collector to the northern boundary of the linear park at the time the subject property is developed. So will the roadway get to Fifth with the implementation of this specific plan? No, it won't. But the applicant does not control that property to the north. Having said that, that property to the north is part of the Lampa Ranch specific plan. We just read the policy that says that we have to have a collector from Railroad all the way to Fifth. So when the property to the north comes forward with its specific plan, we would then look for incorporation of that collector to implement the collector from Railroad all the way to Fifth. Secondly, I want to talk about policy 3.6.c. I did not highlight this in your staff report, but I think it's important to talk about. It's about secondary access. And what this policy says is that secondary access that does not rely on Railroad Street has to be provided if there are more than 39 trips per day, which is basically more than 4 houses. So if you do a parcel map and you have 4 houses, you don't have to have the secondary access. But once you're outside the parcel map realm and you're into the tentative map subdivision realm, you have to provide secondary access. Given that realistically the secondary access will most likely be provided when the property to the north of the linear park develops, the staff is supportive of the secondary access being emergency only until the intersection of Railroad and Salomon, as long as the intersection of Railroad and Salomon functions at a level of service of D or better. That's the city standard. Should the development of this 27 acres yield a level of service at the intersection of Railroad and Salomon that's worse than a D, the secondary access would need to be upgraded from emergency only to a full access. So in considering the master plan amendment, you are required to make 4 findings of fact in the affirmative. The first is the compliance with the goals and policies and action programs of the master plan. In the staff report, as I noted, I went through the entire Lampa Ranch specific plan and identified the compliance. I find it to be in compliance. We have to provide for land use compatibility with existing adjacent uses and no detrimental impacts to other properties. I think this proposed Blackstone specific plan addresses compatibility with adjacent uses. I find the proposed medium density residential to be consistent with the adjacent uses, particularly those to the west. And I find the policy that I discussed that's in the Blackstone Ranch specific plan will further give the board and the planning commission an opportunity to ensure compatibility. Fourth finding is the amendment in response to changed conditions. Yes, there are changed conditions. There's an interest in developing this property. That's why there's a specific plan in front of you with a zoning map amendment in front of you. There is not a development project. I haven't seen a development project. But this is a precursor. It's required before any development can be contemplated by the Planning Commission. So, in the Board of Supervisors in 2006 said, if you're going to develop at Lampa Ranch, you do a specific plan first and you do a zoning map amendment. So I can make that finding. And the fourth finding is the amendment will promote a desired pattern of orderly physical growth. As I said at the beginning, the specific plan addresses design standards and also addresses public services and infrastructure. The standards and policies regarding infrastructure ensure that we have orderly physical growth that will allow for integration with the overall Lampa project. And given that, I can make this finding in the affirmative. I'm now going to stop talking about the specific plan. I'm going to talk about the zoning map amendment. The applicant is seeking a zoning map amendment to rezone the land from agricultural to single-family 6,000. When you consider a zoning map amendment, you need to consider 3 findings of fact. Is it in substantial compliance with the master plan? I I find it is in substantial compliance with the master plan. Single-family 6,000 is one of the zoning districts that corresponds to the medium-density residential designation. Will it provide for land uses compatible with existing adjacent uses? I can make that finding as well, for the reasons I've already stated. And the third finding, the zoning map amendment will not negatively impact existing or planned public services or facilities and will not adversely impact health, safety, and welfare. Again, the specific plan includes policies and development standards to ensure that the public services and facilities are adequately planned for and will not adversely impact health, safety, and welfare. So I can make that finding. So given that I can make the 3 findings in the affirmative, I am recommending approval of the zoning map amendment. With that, I'll stop. I'm happy to answer any questions. And the applicant, Michelle Rambo from Rubicon, is present and does have a presentation.
Questions for staff?
Just one.
Commissioner Borders?
The emergency access, where is it?
It doesn't exist. What would happen is when, let's just say hypothetically, a tentative map comes in, the applicant, because these are the rules of the game, as I like to say, so we'd get to the part, that policy. I'd say the policy says the applicant must have secondary access that does not rely on railroad. At the time of tentative map, the applicant will need to show where that's going to be able to, for you to be able to have master plan consistency.
Commissioner Stowell?
Just, would there not need to be an ordinance for the zoning map amendment?
I believe there's a draft ordinance in your packet, but you do not adopt the ordinance. I'll double check your packet when Michelle's presenting, but the board will adopt an ordinance. Yes, it will be amended by ordinance.
Okay, because if it was, the other thing we have on the agenda today was, or passed, just a zoning code text amendment, we would still see the ordinance, the draft ordinance there, so I was just wondering why there wasn't a draft ordinance with this. More importantly, for you or the applicant to discuss the connection to the linear park trail so that children would be able to walk to Fremont, to talk about that, and also to explain why they did not put student projection estimates in their development plan.
In terms of the pedestrian access to the school, the specific plan, the Blackstone Ranch specific plan, does include policies that talk about connectivity. And in fact, I think if you look at the motion on page 1 in the wording that I'm suggesting, they're both pedestrian linkage related policies. It discusses creating the pedestrian linkage to that linear park as well as to a future trail along the freeway to ensure that there will be safe pedestrian access to the school. Their traffic analysis also talks about the importance of that connectivity. Clearly, the connectivity it's within the policies of the document, and it would be something we would be looking for implementation of at the time of a development proposal was brought forward. In terms of the school projections, the applicant, you're right, did not provide a projected student attendance. Again, we don't have a development project before us. It's a specific plan. I have spoken with the school about this. AJ, Felling? He actually told me, he said, he would guess on number of schools, but we don't, students potentially, but right now it's a bit nebulous because we don't have a project, we don't have a product type. And so for sure, well, we know it's single family residential, right? But we don't know who they're marketing to, things like that. So you're right, we don't, and that could be something we make a point of requesting going forward.
Mr. Tingle?
I'm assuming that should a project be brought to us, that the 7 findings would be part of the staff's assessment of whether or not to recommend approval of any development. And you know my thoughts about the detrimental traffic issue, because right now that neighborhood off of Railroad is a fairly isolated little enclave. And the minute you punch through to Lampa Ranch to develop that 27 acres, there goes that little kind of enclave kind of feel to that area. So not detrimental to the traffic, or, that is something that I really feel like we need to really define what detrimental means. And definitely should a project be brought to us for approval, one would hope that that would include a traffic light at Railroad or some sort of traffic control device, because once you start putting in more homes and you get more street traffic, getting in and out of that area is a little bit interesting already. And Salomon is probably not going to get any less traffic on it than it does today. So that's my only comment.
Commissioner Tingle, thank you for bringing that up, because I didn't include in my comments, and I do want to include now. I believe this application was submitted in September or October. It didn't come to you till now because staff would not support it because of traffic and because of traffic on Railroad. And we were insistent on that secondary access. We were insistent on the collector that connected from Railroad and made its way to the northern boundary of that linear park. And there's been a lot of conversation. So I don't want anyone to think this came in and staff said, oh, good, this is great, let's go. It wasn't that way. And we were very aware of traffic being the issue with this piece developing first, as opposed to the area to the north of the linear park. And we don't take lightly making the findings. Sometimes when I present, if it's sort of easy, like I think that variance was probably an example of something kind of easy, I don't go real in depth on it, but don't think for a minute we don't look very carefully at every single one and make sure we can make it in the affirmative.
No, I'm sure you do. I have no doubt about that. I did go out and speak with the folks at Public Works yesterday and asked about that connector road and the emergency access that is being proposed. And so I'm not sure how that's all going to play out, given the development to the north is not even being talked about now, and that connector road between Railroad and Fifth Street is not even something that is really kind of being looked at right now because there's nothing going on.
Understood exactly why it's a separate and distinct policy that they need to provide secondary access that does not rely on Railroad. We were not going to say, okay, that's fine, we'll wait till the land to the north develops and funnel all those trips on Railroad. That secondary access comes in with the development, albeit it can be emergency only as long as the intersection's functioning.
And again, we're just looking tonight at the specific plan and rezoning it from agricultural to 6,000 square feet, correct?
Correct, recognizing it's in the framework of this future development's going to comply with the rule. This is the new rule book, if you approve it. So if you see things that you think need clarification or that we missed something, this is the opportunity.
Any more questions for staff? Would the applicant like to come forward? And I understand you have a presentation, but first of all, you've seen the conditions and whatever, and you accept those as written or whatever?
We're in agreement with all of the language changes that Hope has proposed.
Wonderful.
As part
And
of it.
you wanted to make, anything you wanted to add to that, or a presentation you wanted to give?
I did have a presentation, but Hope did such a good job that I think I'm just going to go, for the record, my name is Michelle Rambo. I'm with Rubicon Design Group representing the applicant, Blackstone Development. Like Hope said, this is just an overall broad framework, plans and policies and procedures, basically, for any future development that comes into the site. So we are looking at issues that would come in with any development, the traffic, the park connectivity, everything including noise and the architecture that might come in, and the setbacks so it's a little combination of everything. It's got some architectural design guidelines, it's got some infrastructure guidelines. So there is a very comprehensive look at any impacts that could come in the future and how to deal with those.
Questions for the applicant?
I have one.
Commissioner Tingle? Oh, excuse me. I'm looking.
I don't know, you guys.
You want to turn the name tags around?
Yeah. That darn block in my driveway. Go ahead.
I was going through some of the design and development standards, and it occurred to me that there's nothing addressing solar. And I don't know if that was intentional or not, but one of the other things that occurred to me is that we need to start thinking about, you can now buy solar panels that look like tiles. That look like regular tile and are not any more architecturally displeasing than a piece of tile on your roof. And I know for later on that it's probably not important here, but I think it's later on it's going to be important for us to start considering those things and how they affect plans also. So I just mentioned that because I noticed you did not say anything about solar. And I'm not specifically talking about solar panels on somebody's roof, but there's so many new alternatives coming up, and this is going to be a new subdivision, so.
That's Tesla.
You're right, it's not specifically called out for, but if it fits within the architectural design guidelines, if you've got a roof tile that fits with the design guidelines, then there's nothing that says you can't use it.
Oh, you hold off, okay. No other comments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Public comment. If you would step forward and give your name and make your comments.
I'm Rick Riondo. I'm very impressed to see the number of neighbors that I have here today. I'm not criticizing Ms. Sullivan. She has the patience of a stone. I tested her with my ignorance this morning for over an hour. She was great. And then I found out that my neighborhood, and I live on Railroad Drive, that we have over 60 homes and only 49 notices were sent for this meeting. And on every notice that was sent for this meeting, it said that the meeting started at 3:30. When she was kind enough to give me a copy of the agenda, I found out that this particular aspect wasn't going to happen until after 5. So I have a number of people who all believe that they couldn't get off work at 3:30 to come to this meeting to express their views too. Some of that stuff bothers me in my democratic republic, this government for people. That's important to me. I want Railroad Drive eliminated completely from all plans as a primary or as a secondary road of access. All of those 60-plus houses, all of my neighbors in there, use Railroad Drive. I moved there not quite 3 decades ago onto Railroad. Most of my neighborhood was occupied by retired people. I'm a retired person now too, so I look forward to the same thing. But what happens to retired people is they die. 3 years or so after I moved in, they built Fremont Elementary School. I had some more neighbors who did not want to listen to children playing, so they moved. Okay, that opened it up even more. So who moved in to that little neighborhood? Young families with kids, which I think is great. That's fine by me. Except now Railroad Drive is occupied by kids walking to and from, I'm talking little kids now, walking to and from school out of their neighborhood. And they walk on Railroad Drive. Now the younger families that move in are in a bigger hurry than I am. I'll put it that way. I go down Railroad Drive in first gear. I have a 5-speed, and I go down it in first gear. I've got people on that coming out of that neighborhood who hit 3rd and 4th gear before they get to Solomon. That's a little quick for me. You build another 100 and some odd homes out there on Lampa using Railroad as the primary access to that neighborhood, you're going to have kids get run over. I know this too. If I have a guest and parked at the curb and my neighbor across the street has a guest parked at the curb, that becomes a one-lane road. And you want to put another 100 houses at the other end of that? That doesn't cut it. I would greatly appreciate it if you would cut Railroad out of your plans completely. Access it off of Fairview, for crying out loud. Access it like off of Fifth Street to Railroad, that doesn't cut it. Fifth Street to the neighborhood might, but Fairview, I think, makes more sense. And you could put a couple of access roads there. Thank you. Again, I'm Rick Riondo. I'll go sit down. Oh, questions? Okay.
I'm going to step up if no one else will.
All right, Mr. Flegel.
For the record, I'm Jim Flegel. I live on Caboose Drive. I think most of this meeting is about zoning. I mean, I kind of agree with the young gentleman that he just spoke. And, but I think with all the building going on in Carson City right now and the big project you got going on from the high school down to Fifth, you know, I think, and I've seen construction all over town, I think we're to leave this portion of land as agricultural for now instead of changing the zoning, if that's what this meeting is basically about. Hope, is that what this meeting is basically about?
It actually has two pieces, but the second piece is rezoning the land from agricultural to single-family 6,000.
Yeah, I would appreciate leaving it as agricultural right now because there's so much construction going on. You know, and you ought to give it 5 years and see where we are, see where Carson City is in 5 years. Because, man, you got a lot of people. You know, and I'm glad, I was never aware that we had all this water. I thought we were in a drought session for a while there, but apparently not. You know, Carson City must have a lot of water somewhere, and that's usually what growth is about, is water. You don't have water, people will leave the city. That's for sure, because you got to have water. So anyway, I mean, and I don't agree with that many lots. I think, you know, if someday they should build in that small portion, you know, put cul-de-sacs at the end of the two roads, at dead end, and leave the rest as kind of an open space for a doggy park or something like that, you know. But if this is more about zoning, I would leave it agricultural for now until we see where we are in 5 years in Carson City, because there's a lot of construction going on. And I disagree with this project at the end of Railroad, as especially that many homes. Way too many for Railroad. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lee Harder. So far, I'm the only person who lives right next to that beautiful pasture. We live at the very end of Trolley, and across my fence is the sagebrush and the dirt and everything that's there. I agree with Rick Riendo on the problems of traffic on Railroad Street. And this promise of someday an exit of Railroad going across the Lampa Ditch, across the multi-use trail, and someday connecting with 5th or Highway 50, that's fine, but it's pie in the sky. Apparently, there's been no attempt at all of any kind of plan or people coming in wanting to take over the land north of the ditch, north of the multi-use plan. How much longer are the people in the existing neighborhood and these new 60 or so odd homes going to have their health, safety, and welfare all trying to get out on Railroad Avenue? Another 15 years, 20 years? I don't know how long we have to have our health, safety, and welfare impacted, but I think that should be an absolute condition. Don't even clear the land till they have a way out going north to get us out of there. There's one other question which nobody has addressed yet, and that's really right adjacent to the freeway. This land is not suitable for anything other than the current pasture land. Our house is approximately a block away from the freeway. We hear the freeway every single day, 24 hours a day. We can't leave our windows open at night without hearing the freeway. As you drive along the new freeway in Carson, this is the only section that does not have a sound wall, except right up by the interchange, way up there. No sound wall at all. My wife, who's lived in the property for about 15 years, tells me that NDOT said, we don't need a sound wall, the freeway is depressed there. And yes, for the very most southern part of this proposed development, it is recessed. But down where the multi-use path and the ditch join into the freeway, it's level. There's no sound wall there at all. The noise is atrocious. Nobody is going to want to live there because of the noise. I'm not a sound engineer, but this is what we listen to all the time.
I'm standing right next to the NDOT.
Can you hear that?
The south end of the proposed Loma Ranch, and I'm facing the microphone, and I are facing the highway now. I'm turning around so the microphone is facing the street. There go the trucks, constant noise all the time from the roadway here. Not even any motorcycles going by right now.
That's the noise you hear adjacent to the freeway. The design standards, I'm not an expert with these things. The design standards, as I read them, and it was a big, thick packet, and I didn't want to take all of Hope's time, calls for 8-foot-high wooden fences. That's the max. So there's not going to be any kind of sound deafening to speak of for the houses that will eventually go along the freeway. But it's mainly the problem with the traffic on Railroad, which is my main complaint. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Carol Lee Challender, and I live right on the corner of Caboose and Railroad. And I would like to say that I met with Hope yesterday, and she was very, very delightful and helpful. Little Railroad, which is our only access in and out of our little subdivision, and there's 64, 69, I'm not sure how many homes we have in our little subdivision, but everybody has to go in and out on Railroad. Plus, we are only half a block away from Fremont Elementary School. And I think that's a very, very important consideration. When people come to pick up their kids from the elementary school, at the end of the day, they come in and they park on Railroad on both sides. And some of them get out of their car and go meet their kids, and others just sit there and wait for the kids to toddle over there. If you think that most families have 2 cars, just in our subdivision alone then, say if we have 64 houses, I mean, we've got 128 cars dealing with going up and down little 4-block Railroad as it is. Now, if you add another 110 to 120 homes, and you think they're going to come and go up and down our little 4-block Railroad? No. I don't think that can happen. And half a block away from an elementary school. I think that's extremely important to consider. During the summer, we have families that are riding their bicycles and their little tricycles. And what do? They ride on Railroad and then go around Pullman and come back around and ride on Railroad. I would certainly want to propose that a contractor would have to make an access road, I would say to Fairview, you know, because you've got Fifth Street, you're only going to go to linear, you don't know about the development north or when that's going to happen. I would want them to make an access road to Fairview. They have to have another way to go in and out of this proposed subdivision other than our little 4-block railroad drive. Thank you.
I'll throw my 2 cents in too. I'm Tom Seiler. I'm right on the end of railroad there, ground zero to all this that's going to happen. And you guys can make it real easy. I'll give the same arguments everyone else has. Just don't change it. Leave it like it is. That'll fix everything. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Janet Brooks, and I also live in that area. And one of the attractive things that I found of the area was that it was really quiet. There's only one way in and out. It just seemed like a really good community. People were walking every night. You have, like she was mentioning, kids riding their tricycles, and it was, you know, pretty safe. You don't have a lot of traffic there. I don't want to see it, you know, into that other subdivision. Earlier in this session, you were talking about your schools and you know, how many students you are expecting. You have all those apartments coming in on Little, right across the street from Fremont. Sorry. And then you have all these homes that you plan on building at the Lampa Ranch. They're going to be bursting at the seams. I just don't see how this is well thought out, and I also would appreciate that we do not punch through from railroad to that other property. Thank you.
Hi. I speak to Hope all the time. My name is Heather. I live on Trolley across from Lee. Don't change it.
Anyone else? Bring it back. To clarify, Hope, I believe in our discussion earlier, wasn't it stated that once the 4th house is built or whatever, there has to be a second access road into the property?
The way the policy reads right now is that when there's more than 39 trips, which equates to 4 houses, the trip generation 4 houses, there needs to be secondary access. However, as long as the level of service at the intersection of Railroad and Salomon is D or better, that secondary access can be emergency only.
And what does it take from the 39 trips to get to D?
Well, you'd be looking at background traffic as well. Right now, the traffic analysis that was submitted as part of the specific plan does not show it going to a level of service D. Is that correct? So what would happen is when it came in for an actual development, say tentative map, at that point in time, we would have them do a traffic study. It would take into account increases in background traffic, and we'd see where that level of service was at that point.
That seems to be the number one concern of most of the people that have come forward to speak, and maybe we can get some clarification as to, regardless of where it comes in from, at what point, I mean, if you expect that 50 houses, 100, where would kick it off to where you would think it might take another road?
Dan Stuckey, city engineer for the record. I mean, they're going to have to do the engineering analysis. I don't have a specific number that's going to trigger that. So I can't answer your question.
I mean, the whole thing couldn't build out and not probably get to that point if you've got 100 and some homes back. I'm just trying to get a...
Yeah, I mean, it's going to have to be looked at. I mean, that's why we put that in there, is we need to ensure that the level of service is adequate for that development.
And that's true with any development we do. You folks look at it, and if the traffic gets too bad, they have to make adjustments road-wise, width-wise, light-wise, whatever, to accommodate, no matter where it is. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. And the other thing, I believe, Little Lane was mentioned, that's not apartments, that's actually attached, single-family, I believe, units.
Arbor Villas is attached townhouses, yes.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner.
Okay.
So the secondary access road that's not really planned yet, per se, my understanding from the Public Works folks is that that road that's not planned yet, that would potentially be planned, would come out on the road that parallels Fremont School. No, not Solomon.
Actually, that's not true. I'm like perplexed.
The map they showed me was that the access...
It's actually not identified. So essentially, if you look at, I'll go back to the first slide. The subject property has access on Railroad Drive. It is blocked by private, it clearly can't access onto the freeway. It is blocked by private property, and actually to the south, it's property owned by NDOT. They don't control the land to the north, and they don't control the land to the south. So what would need to occur is, at the time they're contemplating development, they're going to need to negotiate with someone, be it NDOT or a private landowner, to figure out where they can successfully negotiate this secondary access. And at that point, they would submit that as part of their tentative map. Now, to the best of my knowledge, and Michelle Rambo may have different information, there hasn't been a successful negotiation with a neighboring property owner for that secondary access. So to guess that's going to Fairview, or to guess that's going to Firebox, or to guess it's going to Fifth is just that, a guess.
And looking at that map, the most logical would be to come to the south end and just come back out towards Solomon. I mean, if that could be negotiated or whatever. But again, we're here tonight for the site plan and changing it from farming to 6,000.
Well, it's, again, I like to call it the rules of the game. So it's a specific plan. The specific plan is going to say what are the rules that are in place at the time of future development of this land. And then you'll review those rules against the development to make sure everything's in compliance. The second thing you're being asked for is a zoning map amendment. So it's not a site plan, it's a specific plan that identifies all the policies that will govern future land development on this 27 acres.
And despite all the design guidelines and all that, that would all have to come back here before anything would be done, so.
That's exactly right. Well, most likely, if it was 4 lots or less, we have the authority.
Further discussion, Commissioner Stowell.
So again, the secondary access issue, it's an existing development standard, correct? That there has to be a secondary access when there's more than 39 trips for any kind of development.
For a subdivision of land, and by definition, that would be more than 4 houses, more than 39 trips.
So when the first phase comes in, wherever that is on this development, if it's 15 houses, it can't go forward, or are you saying that the level of service D on Solomon is a way to get around that?
There's 2 pieces. One, there's a requirement for secondary access. So then the conversation was held, well, does the secondary, and we actually had 2 codes we were applying. There's the fire code, which is emergency access, secondary access, and then there's the development standards enforced by our engineering division that says when you have a subdivision of land, you must provide a secondary access. And so in focusing on the engineering standard, and I'll turn it over to Dan Stuckey in a minute, but the engineering standard says there needs to be the secondary access. So then the question was, well, does the secondary access have to be fully developed, given that when the land to the north develops, we're going to be connecting the collector to Fifth, or can it be emergency-only access? And so as long as the intersection of Railroad and Solomon was functioning at a level of service D or better, the staff was supportive of a level of an emergency access only. And I'd like to turn it over to Dan Stuckey, because that was sort of a superficial, maybe explanation.
But quickly on that before, following up on that, even emergency access has to gain access through somebody to get it out or in and out of there. It's regardless whether it's emergency or secondary, it has to be negotiated with another landowner or something to have it before it can go forward.
You're exactly right, and in fact, it can't be negotiated as emergency only because we need to be sure that should the level of service drop below the D, that they have secured the ability to construct a fully functioning road as their secondary access.
So basically, if more than 4 houses or 39 trips are there, someone's going to have to negotiate another access into that property.
Per the policies that are in the proposed specific plan, yes.
I mean, I really don't have a lot. I think Hope said it well. I mean, there needs to be a secondary access. The question is, is it need to be full or emergency? And that's what that 3.6C is. It needs to be shown that adequate level of service is met. If that is shown, then we will allow that secondary access to be emergency access only.
Commissioner Stowell.
Just, I think, given the fact that we're looking at a specific plan, it's a conceptual layout that's showing 112 single-family homes. I really think that going forward, as we look at other phases of Lampa Ranch or any other development, that really and truly the applicant should be required to analyze the impact on the schools. It makes no sense that we have an application here where they spent a lot of money on traffic analysis based on a conceptual plan, but yet we can't get projections for the students. That makes no sense. And they could have gone to the school district, and the school district could say, based on 112 single-family homes, it's 38 per 100, whatever. That's the estimate going forward. It doesn't lock them in, but it says if it's 60 students or 100 students, where would they be zoned to, and does that school have the capacity to handle that many students? I think it's crazy for us to be looking at these projects and not have that information.
I would think we'd look at that at the time the project is brought forward as well, but also we could actually, from the presentation from the school district tonight, where they said there's so many students for a general family home, estimate there's 60 or so. And I believe, Hope, you mentioned you had spoken to the school and they thought they could absorb whatever was coming in there. So, questions or comments?
I have a general comment on this, on the Lampa Ranch in general. From the very beginning, we have been told that we will have access to Highway 50. We will have access to 5th Street. I don't see that happening, and I don't know that we should be moving forward with any more until we get those commitments, or that we see that those access points are all possible.
But isn't this the process, Lee and Hope, that we go, the rules of the game are set, and then you do the zoning, and then you get to that specific? Maybe the problem is we've got this specific plan, and we really aren't there yet. We're just going to the property's use and what is going to be zoned.
I do agree with the chair, but I do agree with Commissioner Eswine. You haven't seen it. That's a true statement. In terms of the connection to Highway 50, what the board did with the North Lampa Ranch specific plan is they put a cap on the number of units that can be built there, and it stops, I want to say it was 811 units, and it stops at that cap until they can connect to Highway 50. They lawfully have access to Highway 50. So, and the reason for the cap at that number is to preserve the level of service. I think it was at the intersection, I want to say Robinson and Solomon. And so here, we talked long and hard about this connector to 5th, and we had talked about the concept of having a land reservation on the land to the 5th to obligate it. And in talking that through with the applicant, and I agree with this, and I'll stand by this, the land to the north will be obligated to do a specific plan, just like this 27 acres is. And I do believe that it's at that time that we're implementing consistency with the master plan, and it's at that time we get the connection to 5th. It's an unknown. we still don't have it because the land's not developing. But often with future roadways, that's how the roadways get built, is you have to wait for the land around them to get built. And that's kind of where we are. So I agree with both of you.
To clarify too, the land between Fifth and this development, the public land across the street from the development going towards the high school is still owned by the Lampas, correct? Where the pastures are, et cetera, I believe that is still Lampa land?
The property to the north of the linear park, south of Fifth Street, I believe is owned by Lampa.
Yes, it is. I believe so, and the two, well, the two pieces going north were controlled by different family members, and the piece going south, I believe, whatever. But I mean, that's kind of how, it's all part of the Lampa land.
Again, typically road construction and dedication right away occurs when land starts to develop. This is a big area with Lampa Ranch, which is why there's this placeholder called a specific plan here. And it's going to be incremental and things will develop in pieces, and that roadway network it's going to be frustrating because it's not all going to connect on day one. But I think we're doing the right thing and in terms of trying to get the pieces and so that we can make the connections that were contemplated.
And I'm fairly comfortable with the fact, as I clarified earlier, and for the people in the audience, the fact that somebody's going to have to get a secondary access before anything can basically be developed, be it emergency, new route or whatever. It's not going to all be on railroad or they can't develop it. So anyway, reading that right.
Secondary access after the,
Four houses.
well, 4 houses, but if Railroad and Solomon becomes a D grade traffic, so.
Because even if it's emergency, there has to be access.
But doesn't have to be used. It can only, if it's
But
emergency,
it's emergency, right. So what we have to consider is what does, and I don't know if this is going to complicate our discussion, or maybe it will provide some insight to the neighborhood, but what does a level D grade look like? What does that mean? Is that 500 cars an hour? Is it? Okay. But, so that's when the emergency access will be opened, when we have a measure on that, when we're at that D grade intersection.
At this point, no one has been able to negotiate any access with any of the surrounding landowners, and that will have to be done for either emergency or regardless before this thing can go forward.
I think what Commissioner Monroy's asking is what does a level of service D look like?
Yes.
And I'd ask the city engineer to respond to that.
Yeah, so a level of service of D is basically at the intersection. They're going to evaluate Railroad and Solomon, and it's basically like waiting times at the intersection. So I think a level of service D is looking at like a 25 second to 35 second, I think, wait time through an unsignalized intersection, versus like a level A, it's 10 seconds or less. So you're basically moving through the intersection really fast. Everything's moving well. So that's the difference between a D and, I guess, an A. And so a D is what we consider still adequate. It's not an A, but it's still adequate by city standards. Once it drops below that, then we start looking, there needs to be better circulation and traffic flow through that.
And there's not access across Solomon going further west, so anyone coming out of there either has to make a left going south or a right going north off Railroad. And I imagine you'd often wait for 35 seconds if you're heading south, and if you're heading north, it's probably pretty quick getting out there.
Yeah. So they look at they look at different traffic movements, peak times. I mean, they're looking. It's a study that looks at a lot of those different variables, so it'll be looked at. Yeah.
So the city entered into a development agreement only for Lampa Ranch North, and there was no commitment in terms of the proposed connector road, nothing in terms of outside Lampa North, because I'm just wondering if you still had a master developer for the entire Lampa Ranch, it seems like some of these things would not be coming forward. But if this whole Lampa Ranch specific plan area has been carved into separate ownerships, is that what's happened over the time?
Actually, Stephen Pote, who's here, he's with Development Engineering. He and I have commiserated a lot that we wish Lampa Ranch specific plan was being contemplated in its totality. It would just make the comprehensiveness of the development so much easier, as opposed to looking at the area north of Fifth in isolation and working with those property owners on a development agreement. And yes, that development agreement is specific to Lampa North and the area to the Fifth and was signed by those property owners. We're not dealing with a single property owner. And so now we're looking at this 27-acre property, which seems so isolated in the big scheme of things. But on the other hand, what does the master plan tell us? They have to do a specific plan. They've done a specific plan. We've done everything we can to create a comprehensive development, or put everything in place that we can to force the implementation of what the board adopted in 2006. But you're right, there are these gaps, physical gaps, that until the land develops, we're not going to be able to fill it in.
But we are basically just putting this land into what the master plan recommends it be done with if it goes from agricultural through the specific plan and then the zoning. That's all we're doing at this point. We're not approving any development plan or anything else.
Right, what you're doing is you're basically approving the rule book, and you can only approve the rule book if you find that it's consistent with the existing master plan. It's staff's position that it is consistent with the master plan. If you can cross that bridge, you can then consider the zoning map amendment.
Bring it back for further discussion or a motion.
I think I need to say something.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
The master plan requires us to go through this step. All right. We have, through what the staff has done, we have limited some of the scopes of what we're doing, probably in the biggest area of concern, which is access. Because we're going to force anyone, what we're approving tonight is not 112 lots. What we're approving tonight is about 29 acres and some building requirements if somebody built a house in there. But we have told them that if they build more than 4 houses, they're going to have another way to get in. And it's going to have to be a real road. Even if it's quoted an emergency road, it's going to have to be a real road, because one day it may be a real road. We can't control what happens to the north, and we certainly need to be sympathetic to the people on Railroad, and I think what staff has done is kind of said that. We've set out the plans for somebody in the future to come back with a design, and that design is going to have to include 2 access roads. So, so that's kind of where we are now. The frustration I can see from the community is, well, the camel just got his damn nose underneath the tent, and now we got no control over it.
Still do.
But I think from our standpoint, we have to follow what the master plan said that we need to do. We also have to be as concerned as we can about the whole development in the neighborhood, and I think staff has done the best job they can, because if they put more than 4 houses out there, they're going to have to negotiate with somebody to build a road, which should alleviate most of the concerns about the people on Railroad. Because if I had a brand new road in my subdivision and I had one of those 4 houses, I'd probably want to use that instead of drive through with all the kids. It's the logic of it. And I think everybody has to take a little faith.
And it also may help alleviate some of the traffic on Railroad if there's another access in and out that they'll be coming out, they won't even be coming on Railroad. So that's what I've been trying to say for a while. Do we have?
Anybody want to make a motion?
I'll give it go ahead.
I will make the motion.
Thank you.
I move to adopt resolution number 218 PCR3, recommending to the Board of Supervisors approval of MPA 17185, a master plan amendment to create a new specific plan area for 26.89 acres of the existing Lampa Ranch specific plan area located at the east end of Railroad Drive, APN 010-05144, based on the findings contained in the staff report and subject to the incorporation of the modified language in policies 3.1.2B and 3.1.2C as stated.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Patterson seconds. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, Commissioner Eswine, Commissioner Tingle are opposed. Okay. You want the second one? You want me to take it?
I'll do it. Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of ZCA 18. ZMA? Mine says ZCA here. All right. Okay. ZMA 17186, a zoning map amendment to change the zoning designation from agricultural to single-family 6,000 on a 26.89 acre property located at the east end of Railroad Drive, APN 010-05144, based on the findings contained in the staff report.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Preston. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Commissioner Tingle is opposed. All right. Thank you. Take a couple minutes.
You want to buy a house cheap?
There's going to be a few for sale. Let's get a list of the things.
G6, ZCA-18-074 for possible action to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors regarding a zoning code amendment and ordinance amendment, Title 18 Appendix of the Carson City Municipal Code, Development Standards, Division 15, Water Sewer Reclaimed Water Standards to revive certain guidelines for sewer design criteria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hope Sullivan, Planning Manager. I'm going to speak to the framework, and the city engineer, Dan Stuckey, will speak to the technical aspects of this request. The city engineer is recommending an amendment to the development standards. The development standards are part of Title 18. Only the Board of Supervisors may amend the code, or Title 18 of the zoning code. The Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors after consideration of the findings of fact. There are 3 findings of fact: compliance with the master plan, land use compatibility, and no negative impact on existing or planned public services or facilities. The staff in the staff report has reviewed these 3 findings and has been able to make them in the affirmative. We are recommending approval, and I'll turn it over to Dan Stuckey to provide the technical presentation. Tamar, can you switch to the other computer?
Great. Dan Stuckey, City Engineer for the record. So I wanted to just give 3 brief slides just to kind of go over what this is about and why I would like to do this. It's essentially a factor of safety thing. We're going to increase our factor of safety. So in engineering, you all know this, everything we do, there's a factor of safety. You don't just design a building to handle, the load that you expect. You design it to handle a lot more than that. I mean, so this is just a way to look at our sewer system like that. So why do we want to basically, and I'll get to what our current code has and what we're proposing, but essentially this is increasing the factor of safety for our sewer system. So why do we want to do that? Well, setting a capacity that's 50% of the full of the pipe versus 75%, which is what we have now, is basically safeguarding against, in some cases, we're predicting what flows are ultimately going to be, and sometimes they come in higher, sometimes they come in lower, but there's uncertainty there. So, if they come in higher, you'd like to have a little room available to accommodate that. Also, over time, your system ages, cracks form in the pipe, joints offset, and groundwater infiltration can come into the sewer system, increasing flow as well. And then also, as you'd expect, you have blockages occasionally and build up in the sewer system. So all of these factors combine, and they can reduce capacity in the system, right? Ultimately, what we'd like to avoid is, and this doesn't happen really much, but you want to avoid your system getting above capacity and sewer overflows, heaven forbid, sewer overflows in the streets, right? So that's the reason why we have these criteria in place. And then also, I think the second component of it is just growing smartly, adequate planning to accommodate future development and make sure we're not stuck in a situation down the road where we do have a system overcapacity and we got to make a costly adjustment immediately. So that's the reasons. Like I said, right now, our current criteria for all pipes is we consider pipe capacity at 75% full, basically. So there's 25% room for that available capacity. What I'm suggesting here is to modify that for pipes less than and equal to 15-inch in diameter. So those pipes would drop down. We'd only allow those to fill up in a sewer analysis up to 50% full rather than 75%. And then pipes above 15 inches would still remain the same as our current criteria. I think one of the checks I always like to make when we're looking at code changes is how does it compare to industry standards and other agencies within the region. So I just kind of put up a summary there. So City of Reno is actually even stricter than what we're going to. They only allow pipes for all pipe sizes up to 50%. Douglas County is essentially what we'd be going to with this change. City of Sparks is very similar. They allow 50% up to 18 inches and less, so slight difference. So I just wanted to give you a feel for where we're at, what I'm proposing relative to what others are doing. I want to give you an overview, kind of just really briefly, of what this could mean for the impact of our sewer system. So the green pipe, the lines there are green. Those are pipes that are less than 15 inches in size. So you see there's a lot of them. I mean, 90% of our system is 15 inches or less. And really, I mean, all this, our houses, the streets we live on, typically a lateral comes out of our house, connects to a line that might serve, 5, 10 houses. So really, on most of these pipes, there's really minimal flow. It's 5 or 10 houses. The issue that really would be impacted is scenarios where they're collecting a lot of these houses, and further downstream, it's building and building, and we still have an 8-inch or 10-inch pipe. And also, there's future vacant areas that could tie into this that are undeveloped right now, right? So we just did a wastewater collection system master plan last year. We had a consultant look system-wide. And I just wanted to show you, even though there's 90% of our system that fit this, we estimate in the build-out scenario, which is the blue, shapes that you can see there, that's where it's vacant right now, undeveloped. And in the build-out scenario, if that's developed and all that's contributing to our system, the red lines there are really what we anticipate violating criteria right now. And it's really only about 2% of the system. So it's not, this criteria change is not going to completely blow up everything. It's just something in the build-out scenario we need to consider and make sure that when developments come in, we're making the right, having them analyze it correctly and making the right decisions as far as our future system. And I kind of explained what those blue shaded areas. So that's really all. I just wanted to give you a quick background on what this is. So with that, I'll answer any questions.
So the areas that might be impacted, do they just run additional line or go in and replace with larger pipe?
Some of them, they would have to extend a line and build out their development. But if it did impact downstream development where it'd cause an upsize, that's something we'd have to work through on that.
So something where there's a large apartment area, say up at Silver Oak, if those both came online, do they tie into the existing or do they run new?
Yeah, they tie into our existing infrastructure, which is shown there.
And so I'm guessing that you plan through planning and zoning, what kind of pipes you're running in the areas, et cetera, as it grows out.
Exactly, yeah, it's looking, holistically at our system when we look at these developments.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Commissioner President?
A lot of this seems to be things that are on septic right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. I should have pointed that out. Some of these are pending the red lines you see there. It might be they're considering that all septic areas are converted and connected to the city. So this is really the most conservative build-out approach. Some of those might never connect. So that's what, you're exactly right. I should have pointed that. I apologize for that. But yes, this shows not only undeveloped vacant lands, but also areas that are currently on septic that could connect to the city system.
Got to get used to this. My next question would be, are you looking to, at some time, where you're looking at changing and upgrading these connectors? Are you looking at impacts for future development or impacts from people that are going to come off of the septics?
Mostly impacts for future development. I mean, the septic conversion is kind of a separate, they're kind of two different things. So I mean, mostly primarily what is shown here, these red violated areas, are the result of undeveloped area that's going to be developed. The septic conversions are somewhat of a minor portion of that.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Commissioner Borders?
I kind of looked at it from the other end. If you, never mind. If I'm a developer and I have a 6-inch sewer line at 75%, the change in this ordinance is going to require me to go to an 8-inch line. So the impact on the developer is he's going to have to use a bigger piece of pipe. And how that, then that trickles down all the way into, finally gets into our system. But from an economic standpoint, as a developer, we're just basically changing pipe sizes.
Exactly. So, and I do want to reiterate, some developers are small enough that they would use, our minimum pipe size is 8 inches regardless. So in a lot of developments, they're only using 8-inch for their entire development, and it's fine. But yes, you're right. I mean, it could come into a scenario where in the past, we would have allowed a 10-inch and they might have to make it a 12-inch.
My question is I'm sorry, I've hung around with a lot of plumbers, and the 2 rules, wash your hands when you're done, but the first one is everything goes downhill. So if I've got a big pipe with a lot of 75% capacity going in from 12 inches down to 8 inches and into your system, am I overloading your system?
Yeah, that's what, I mean, the master planning looks at that, so we don't ever want a situation where we have 12-inch going into an 8-inch, so that would be part of the improvements, I guess, if we had that scenario, that would have to be adjusted as well. So you wouldn't want those bottleneck areas, exactly.
So as a developer, for instance, let's say I'm doing Blackstone, and I'm going to increase the density to the 6,000 square foot lots. And would I be required to put in the larger one? But then how am I going to get it to your plant?
They would have to do an analysis for the system downstream of their development all the way to the plant, basically, until it's known that there's adequate capacity. So anything, I mean, they'd have to look at their system, and our downstream system, and chase it down a ways to make sure we don't run into a situation where they're putting in a 12-inch pipe and all of a sudden downstream we have an 8-inch pipe. We would want them to look at the downstream portion that they're contributing to.
My next question would be, in some ways, as a builder and developer, you might look at that as kind of a way to control additional growth. So my question on this would be, is on the other hand, have you prepared a CIP project in order to take care of a lot of the infrastructure that's already there that is now being impacted by stormwater and so forth?
Yeah, so our existing CIP plan, which we project out, 5 years and even longer in some instances, some of the areas where we have an existing condition issue, they are on our CIP list, and we plan on, when we get the money and when we get to that point, we prioritize all of our projects. So when that project comes up, we would definitely improve that. But some of these violations are, like what you see up there, are not existing right now. It's more of what we'd anticipate being a problem down the road if stuff built out. Yeah.
Anyone else? Public comment. Any public comment on this item? let's bring it back for a discussion or motion.
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Eswan, please.
I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of ZCA-18-074, an ordinance amending Title 18 zoning, Appendix A, Development Standards, Division 15.3.2, Sewer Design Criteria, to modify main analysis with respect to pipe size and capacity and providing other matters properly relating thereto.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second from Commissioner Borders. On the vote, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Okay. Staff report.
Yeah,
If you're ready. Good.
just briefly to cover a couple things. Items that were previously before the board and before the Planning Commission that went to the board earlier this month. We had the sign ordinance for the marijuana establishments that's now been back to them. It's back now to the way it was recommended initially by the Planning Commission, and so that's going to second reading in June.
Is that a victory for us?
And they also, the Board of Supervisors at their last meeting, we had, at the request of a supervisor, we had some discussion and got some feedback on temporary signs. I got some direction to come back, which will be on my list. Transitioning to things on your agenda for June will be the June Planning Commission meeting. I see somebody interested in temporary signs. It'll be the next meeting of the Planning Commission, last Wednesday in June. We'll bring an ordinance for discussion related to temporary signs. If you're interested, have a little time to pull up that from the Board of Supervisors meeting and watch it. They had a lot of comments on that, so we'll be bringing back something to discuss and make a recommendation here. For June, we have a number of items. We also have a special use permit for the Children's Museum. They're going to be doing an outdoor play area for the kids, so modifying kind of the outdoor area of that. We have 2 special use permits from the school district. One is going to be the Fremont Elementary School expansion that AJ spoke of at the meeting, and the second one, the Mark Twain expansion, which I take it, as he said, is removing some of the portables there, but those special use permits coming in. We have a zoning map amendment related to Lampa Ranch North. It's only related to changing the ordinance regarding the timing of when the zone change occurs. So it's a pretty minor thing. There'll be some discussion about it, but it's not new zoning or anything. It's just related to the timing of the zoning. We have. And then in addition to the zoning code amendment for temporary signs, I'm bringing the zoning code amendment for accessory dwelling units. Which I was going to say during, you had the housing group. I think the question for somebody, what does the housing group do? I mean, this is something that kind of group, things that we can do to help affordable housing. All this is just an absolute drop in the bucket in that. That group championed that up to the Board of Supervisors to get that going. So that's for June.
Okay, do we have any commission reports? I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome our new commissioner and look forward very much to working with you over the next few years, hopefully. Terry, and I'll try to make sure I get your name right every time.
It's okay, Mary Chris Peterson works, I don't care.
Anyway, any other comments from, all right, we'll make public comment. Seeing none, bring it back for adjournment. Motion for adjournment.
I move.
I'll second. We're adjourned.